Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. The tapping started before I even realized I wasn't alone in the store. 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 more, running down the glass like a nursery rhyme nobody sane would sing at 1:12 a.m. in the dead of January. I looked up from the lottery display I'd been reorganizing, busy work, comfort work, and saw him grinning at me through the window, his hood pulled low, breath puffing into little ghosts that vanished as soon as they formed. My name is Holly Mercer, 26, night shift clerk at Sunmart Gas and Food, 1442 Old Briar Road, Ashwick, Ohio. And I've never liked winter. The way the cold presses into the seams of everything, the way it makes you hear things that aren't there, the way it forces silence into places meant to be noisy. But that night, the silence didn't feel cold. It felt interested. The man lifted a hand, palm flat on the glass. He didn't knock again. He just lingered there, watching me the way someone watches a stray cat they intend to coax closer. I pressed the intercom button. Store's locked after 1. I can't open the door. He smiled wider, like he'd been waiting for me to say that. Come on, sweetheart. We just need a hand. Car trouble. There was nothing panicked in his voice, nothing rushed or desperate. He sounded like a guy ordering a sandwich. I steadied my breath the way the training binder told us to. Call a tow. His head tilted, an odd, slow tilt, like a puppet with a loose string. Sure, you can step out. Before I could answer, another figure slipped around the right side of the building, taller, still, scanning the lot like he was counting exits. I felt my ribs tighten. My voice came out too soft. There's 2 of you? The man at the window didn't look back. Just need help with the trunk. He split from the door, drifting out of view. The second man drifted the opposite way. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't signal. They just separated like water parting around a stone. The store suddenly felt too small, too bright, too exposed. I stepped around the counter, careful not to make noise I didn't need to. I peeked through the corner of the front window. Snow swirled under the amber parking lot lights, shadows rising and falling like breathing. That's when I saw it. A sedan. Parked sideways near pump 4. Driver door open. Trunk wide open. A tarp lay inside, folded rope on top, and something under the canvas. Long. Weighty enough to bend it. My stomach clenched. Every nerve went hot, then cold. My mind tried to latch on to rational explanations. Maybe camping gear, maybe tools, maybe garbage, maybe... Footsteps. Behind the building. Soft. Wet from snow. Moving closer. I backed up until my spine touched the cigarette display. Then came the sound I already hated. Tap, 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 tap. Slower now. A patient rhythm. Hoodie reappeared at the door, staring straight through me like he could see the pulse hammering in my throat. Come on, Holly. Just a second of your time. He read my name off my badge. But the way he said it, like he'd rolled it around in his mouth first, made my skin crawl. I raised a trembling hand and slammed the emergency lockdown button. Metal shutters groaned down around every window, clattering like chains dropped in a stairwell. Hoodie lunged at the door, palm slamming against the glass right as it sealed shut. He pressed his forehead to it, smile widening. Almost had you. Those 3 words scraped something raw inside me. A security light flickered above pump 4. For a split heartbeat, I saw both men, one at the back of the store, one at the front, standing perfectly still, heads angled like they were listening for a cue. Then darkness swallowed them. Only the open trunk remained. My breath refused to move. My voice refused to rise. My hands shook so hard the intercom button rattled. When police lights appeared at the edge of the lot, red and blue slicing through the snow, I exhaled so sharply my ribs ached. The cruiser rolled up slow, crunching through ice. Officer Jenkins stepped out, scanning the lot like he didn't quite believe what he was seeing. Got a call from dispatch, he said through the intercom slot. Said you hit emergency lockdown? I nodded too fast. 2 men. They were trying, I don't know. He checked the trunk first, lights sweeping across empty metal. No tarp, no rope, no long object. Just the imprint where something heavy had been. Jenkins frowned. "Are you sure you saw—" I'm not stupid or tired or imagining things. But he didn't answer, and I hated how gently he closed the trunk. The cruiser stayed parked outside until sunrise, lights off but engine running. I stayed inside the locked store, every hum of the refrigerator sounding like footsteps at the back door. When my shift ended, I walked to my car with the officer beside me. The snow was smooth, untouched. No footprints except ours, as if nobody had ever been there at all. And that was the part that scared me more than everything else. I didn't quit right away. Bills don't care about fear. And fear, I kept telling myself, could be reasoned with, explained, dismissed. But something changed in me after that night. A thin, invisible film stretched over my thoughts, like I was watching my own life through a window no one else could see through. The next time I worked, I taped cardboard over the front windows before the shift even fully began. My manager rolled her eyes. "Paranoia is bad for customer service, Holly." Maybe so. But paranoia was also the only thing that had kept me alive. Around 2 a.m., the hum of the freezers dropped by a pitch. Just a hair, but enough to make my spine straighten. The silence thickened, the way it had the night of the tapping. Cold air pressed through the seams around the door. I told myself I was imagining it, that memory makes shadows out of nothing. Except, I heard it. Faint, distant. Tap, 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 tap. My lungs froze, not at the door, not outside. From the back hallway. I grabbed the flashlight under the counter. My fingers trembled so badly I dropped it twice. The metal clattered across the tiles, too loud in a store that was supposed to be safe. I walked toward the hallway anyway. The air back there felt heavier, like it remembered something I didn't want to relive. The ceiling lights flickered, buzzing, as if the power were trying to decide whether I deserved clarity or darkness. "Anyone there?" My voice cracked. "This isn't funny." A single soft sound answered me, not tapping. Breathing, slow, deliberate. Inhale, pause, exhale. "Hello?" My voice shrank around the word. Then, quiet footsteps, not approaching, retreating, like someone backing deeper into the storage room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything except move forward because turning my back felt worse. The flashlight beam slid across a stack of paper towels, cases of soda, the mop bucket, and then a smear on the floor, dark, wet, footprint-shaped but smudged like someone stepped in slush and dragged their heel. But the floor had been dry when I arrived. My vision blurred at the edges. Panic compressed my ribs like a vice. I whispered, "You're not real. You're not real." And then the lights above me snapped off. Total darkness. My breath hitched. My flashlight flickered once, then died. Something moved behind me, something slow, something deliberate. I ran. I didn't see the aisle end. I crashed into it so hard my shoulder went numb. Blindly, I clawed my way toward the front counter, palms slipping on air that suddenly felt freezing. When I reached the counter, the lights blinked back on, harsh, fluorescent, and the humming freezers returned to their normal pitch. Silence. Storage room empty. Floor clean. No smear, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Except the cardboard I'd taped over the windows was gone. All of it. Neatly stacked by the door. My stomach dropped into my knees. Someone had been inside the store while I was there, while the doors were locked. I grabbed the phone to call the police. My fingers shook so violently the numbers doubled on the screen. Before I could press dial, the intercom crackled, soft at first, like static under a whisper, then clear, tap, 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 tap. My knees locked, my throat closed. A voice followed, calm, male, the same voice from the window. "You still owe us a second of your time, Holly." I threw the phone down, backed away, slammed into the cigarette rack again. The shutters were down. The doors were sealed. No one could be inside. But the tapping started again, from behind me, on the inside of the shutters. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't breathe. The tapping grew softer, as if whoever, or whatever, was there didn't want out anymore, only wanted me to know they could get in whenever they wanted. I still work nights, still tape cardboard over the windows, still smell the cold when the freezers hum wrong. But sometimes, when the wind settles and the store falls too quiet, I hear it again. Tap, 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 tap. Like they're reminding me the hunt isn't over. I knew something was wrong the moment my tires stopped spinning and the world went quiet, like the storm itself was holding its breath just to watch what would happen to me. That silence, thick, white, frozen, was the first thing that made my pulse tighten. Cars crash on winter roads all the time. People slide off into ditches, call roadside assistance, wait shivering in the dark. It happens. But when my Subaru fishtailed off Route 219 outside Pine Hollow, burying its nose into a bank of churned-up ice, the silence didn't feel unlucky or inconvenient. It felt intentional, like something had guided me just slightly off course. Snow slapped sideways against my windows, a relentless sheet of white that made the world look erased. My phone flickered at one bar, then died in my hand with a pathetic buzz, as if giving up too easily. I sat there for a long second, breath fogging the windshield, my gloved fingers gripping the wheel harder than I meant to. "This is fine," I whispered. My voice sounded too small in the enclosed dark. "It's just a ditch. I can rock the car out." I tried. God, I tried. Reverse, drive, reverse again. The tires shrieked against the frozen earth, spinning uselessly. The car didn't budge. My stomach tightened, not with panic, not yet, but with that sinking heaviness I get when I know I'm at someone else's mercy. Out here, in the storm, I wasn't in control. The road was, the weather was, or maybe something worse. Headlights appeared behind me, out of nowhere, too fast, too bright. They hit my mirrors, exploding against the glass in harsh gold. I squinted against the brightness and exhaled when I realized the beam belonged to a pickup truck pulling to a slow stop behind me. Relief surged through me, sharp and shaky. But then two men stepped out. One wore a bright orange safety vest. The other wore a neon green one, mismatched. No company logos, no reflective IDs, no patches, just vests, like costumes purchased separately at a thrift store. The man in orange tapped on my window with a knuckle so light it felt rehearsed. "Rough night," he said, his smile strangely practiced. His breath fogged the glass in small controlled bursts. "Hop in our truck. We'll take you somewhere warm." Something inside me, instinct, dread, survival, went rigid. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The man in green stood behind him, hands tucked behind his back like he was hiding something, gaze fixed on me and only me, not the crashed car he claimed to be helping with. I cracked the window barely an inch. "I'm okay. I'll call a tow once my phone boots back up." Orange vest leaned down, close enough that I could smell something on him, metallic, like cold pennies or old keys. "Your phone's dead, sweetheart." The word landed wrong, too familiar, too confident. "And this snow's only getting worse?" I forced a smile. "I appreciate it, really, but I'll stay with my car." Green vest shifted his weight slightly, boots crunching in the snow. My headlights lit him from the side, carving sharp shadows on his face. His eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. Orange tried my door handle gently, testing it, a soft click of metal meeting metal. "Locked, huh?" he said. "That's smart, but unnecessary. We're here to help." My throat tightened. Not the overwrought horror movie kind, but the real kind. The way it tightens when you're holding back a tremor in your voice because if you let your fear through, it will spill everywhere. "I'm good," I repeated. Green vest took a few steps backward, moving behind my car, disappearing into the storm-blurred dark. My heartbeat kicked hard. "Where is he going?" I asked, voice too high. Orange's smile didn't falter. "Just checking your tires?" But that wasn't where the tires were. He was heading toward the back seat, or the trunk, or me. A cold prickling shot down my arms. I jammed my keys back into the ignition and rocked the Subaru again. Reverse, drive, reverse. The engine whined like an animal caught in a trap. Snow flew up in sheets behind me. Orange stepped closer, slapping his palm on the hood. Green's silhouette reappeared behind me, blurred through the rear window. This time his hands weren't behind his back. He held something long, dark, heavy. A tire iron. I don't think I decided to drive. I think my body overrode me. The car lurched violently as the wheels caught the smallest thread of traction, just enough to pull the Subaru free of the icy grip. Orange stepped directly into my path, forcing me to yank the wheel, the seatbelt carving a burning line into my collarbone. Snow exploded in all directions as I swerved around him. I hit the gas hard, and the car shot forward, engine roaring. In the mirror, Green raised the tire iron like he was planning to smash the rear window. The pickup's headlights switched to high beams, blinding white swallowing the entire world behind me. The truck lunged forward. The chase lasted 2 miles, maybe more. The storm made every shape ghostly. Every tree twisted, every shadow alive. Their headlights stayed impossibly close, never too near to ram me, never too far to lose me, just close enough to make me choke on fear. Then suddenly, they turned. Left, onto a dark, unmarked logging road. No signal, no hesitation, just gone. Like they'd been following a script and their part ended there. By the time Pine Hollow's lights appeared in the distance, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. My breath came in choked bursts, each inhale tasting like metal and snow and panic. I didn't look in the mirror again. I didn't want to see anything trailing me, not after that, not ever again. My hands shook so hard when I finally reached home that I couldn't get the key into the lock. I fumbled, cursed under my breath, dropped them twice before the door finally clicked open. The moment the warm air hit me, my legs almost gave out. Inside, everything felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, like my house hadn't expected me back. I kept the foyer light off, maybe because I didn't want to see my reflection in the hall mirror. I could feel how wrecked I looked. Eyes wide, pulse racing, snow melting down the back of my coat. I leaned my forehead against the wall and tried to breathe normally. Tried to convince myself it was just 2 weird men in a storm. Just a close call. Just bad luck. But my body didn't believe that. Not when the storm outside kept scraping against the windows like fingernails. Not when the image of that mismatched vest kept flashing behind my eyelids. I showered, fully clothed before I even realized what I was doing. My brain gone. My instincts running the show. Hot water hit my skin in scalding bursts. Steam fogging the glass. My breath shaking out in fractured gasps. I kept expecting to hear a truck engine under the sound of the water. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed listening to the wind shove itself against the siding. Every thud a phantom footstep. Every groan of the house, a hand testing my doorknob. By 5 a.m., my nerves were so frayed I could feel them vibrating under my skin. The sun eventually rose, pale and thin, through the storm clouds. I made coffee but let it sit untouched. My hands weren't steady enough to hold the mug. When I finally worked up the courage to step outside and check the car, the world was transformed, snow blanketing everything in silent white. Too silent. I circled the Subaru, heart climbing my ribs. Nothing broken, no scratches, no shattered window, no tire iron dents. No footprints. Except mine. There should have been tracks. The storm wasn't strong enough to erase them all. The pickup had been close. So close its headlights had filled my mirror with blinding fire. The men had walked right up to my door. They'd stood feet from my car. But the snow was smooth, untouched. It made no sense. Unless they'd never gotten close. Unless the blinding beams had masked something else entirely. Or unless something else was wrong with the night itself. I touched the Subaru's hood. Cold. Too cold. Like the engine hadn't recently been pushed to its limits. My breath stilled. Had the chase even happened the way I remembered? Inside again, the coffee had gone cold. I dumped it out with shaking hands and tried to focus on anything. Laundry, emails, my humming heater, anything normal. But my thoughts wouldn't stick. They slid across the surface of my brain, like ice. I made myself a promise then. Never drive in a storm again. It felt childish. Overreaction. But when night fell, and the road outside my window filled with white again, a familiar panic locked its claws around my lungs. I closed the blinds. I turned off the porch light. But headlights still moved across my ceiling sometime around 11:13 p.m. Soft at first, then brighter, like someone creeping up my driveway. I froze on the couch, breath thinning to a needle point. The engine wasn't loud. It was barely a hum, just enough to vibrate the air. Slow, cautious, familiar. I didn't move until the light faded and the sound drifted away. I slept on the couch, wrapped in blankets that smelled like stale detergent and fear. 2 days passed, then 3. The storm swallowed Pine Hollow in white, chewing through roads and shutting down half the town. I didn't leave the house. But the trucks kept appearing in my periphery whenever I glanced outside. Not close, not parked, just shapes lingering at the far ends of streets. Headlights lingering a second too long before turning away. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe it was paranoia, staining everything I looked at. But the dread wouldn't let go. It grew teeth. One night, on the 4th day, I realized something chilling. The men had known my phone was dead. I hadn't told them. It had died inside the car, in my hand, behind closed windows. How could they have known? After that, I kept the blinds closed at all hours. I stopped answering the door. I unplugged the lamp nearest the window because it cast a silhouette that could be watched from outside. And every night, I listened. Listened for engines, for footsteps in the snow, for someone quietly testing the lock from the other side. Weeks passed before I dared drive again. The sky was clear, the snow packed tight, the world deceptively calm. But I wasn't the same. Every pair of headlights made my throat tighten. Every slow-moving truck made me grip the wheel, until my knuckles paled. And sometimes, God help me when I drive past the tree line, outside Pine Hollow, I swear I see something through the drifting snow. A man in an orange vest, or a green one, standing still, watching, waiting. As if winter isn't dangerous enough on its own, some people wait for storms, because storms make it easier to help you disappear. I didn't mean to remember the exact minute, but some nights it flashes in my mind like a warning flare. 4:42 p.m., January 17th. The hour the woods decided to listen. Travis always swore the cold reset the brain, a phrase he threw at me every time I got stuck in my apartment, spiraling into that tight, sleepless fear that made my throat feel too narrow for air. I'd had panic attacks since September, ever since the surgery. Ever since waking up under fluorescent lights with a nurse saying my name in a tone that didn't match my identity at all. Too soft, too distant, like she was guessing. I guess that's why I agreed to the hike, because I was tired of feeling like a wrong voice in my own life. Jordan drove the 3 of us to Frostline Ridge, this quiet trail near Maple Hollow, Oregon. Snow stacked itself over every branch, smoothing the tree line into soft white curves. The air was thin and young and painfully cold, cold enough to sting the insides of my nostrils. My boots sank an inch with every step, each crunch loud enough to make my heartbeat skip. Travis walked ahead, swinging his arms like he was snowplowing the silence out of the way. Jordan stayed beside me, occasionally brushing my arm with his glove, grounding me whenever I drifted too far into my own mind. I remember watching the sun droop behind the firs and thinking the light looked exhausted, like the day had given up early. "We've got a good hour," Travis said. "Maybe more if the moon's feeling generous." "Our moon's generous?" Jordan asked. "Mine is," Travis said, grinning. I forced a laugh that didn't feel natural. My cheeks were already going numb. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Not peaceful, quiet, more like a held breath, like the trees were eavesdropping. Even the wind felt muted, as if the cold itself had weight. I started noticing little details, my shadow falling wrong across the snow, the silence pressing too close against my ears, the way the air seemed to resist our voices when we spoke. I shook it off. Anxiety distorts sound. But then it came. A scream. Sharp, precise, surgical. Not like someone in pain, not like someone afraid. More like someone practicing a sound they'd never made before. It sliced through the forest, slipped between the branches, and landed hard in my ribs. Jordan froze mid-step. Travis's breath puffed into the air and hung there too long, like even the cold was stunned. "That was a person," Jordan whispered, but his voice wavered like he wasn't sure. The scream didn't echo. It just stayed. Suspended. Held. Travis moved toward it. Of course he did, and I followed because being alone suddenly felt like a death sentence. Jordan followed because he didn't want me left behind. None of us talked. We didn't have to. We saw the footprints. Perfectly straight, evenly spaced. No drag, no shift in weight, no disruption around them. Like someone or something stepped with a pattern programmed rather than learned. The snow beside them was untouched, pristine. Then, I saw him. A figure stood between the trees, facing away. Still. Too still. His coat hung perfectly vertical, not stirring, even when the wind brushed the branches overhead. "Sir?" Travis called. "You hurt?" Nothing. Not a shift. Not a breath. Then the man tilted his head. Just a few degrees at first. Then farther. Then more. Then more past the point a spine should allow. The angle stretching like his neck had no joints at all. My stomach rose into my throat. The back of my tongue tasted like metal. The scream came again. But this time, my name shaped itself inside it. Elu. Jordan whispered. That sounded like you. I felt the ice creep under my skin. Because he wasn't wrong. It wasn't just my name. It was my tone soft, slightly trembling. Like the mornings right after my panic attacks. A second scream split the air behind us. Instant. Wrong. Impossible. Jew are done. Not mocking. Not threatening. Practicing. I felt reality tilt under my boots. The footprints in front of the man kept forming. One. Then another. Then another. Even though his legs hadn't moved. Travis stumbled backward, and the scream, my scream, shifted instantly behind him. That was when I broke. We ran. Not organized, not rational, just a terrified scattering of limbs and breath. Branches raked my jacket, thin cuts of wind slicing my cheeks. I could hear something heavy in the trees beside me, matching my pace so precisely, it sounded like a shadow with mass. It breathed my breaths, copied the sharp inhales, the panicked little whimpers I couldn't swallow down. Each time it repeated them, the mimicry got better. Closer. More me. "Taylor," someone shouted behind me. But then, someone else shouted Taylor too, in my exact voice, from 3 feet away. I didn't turn. The forest thinned, light bleeding through the trees like a lifeline. I stumbled onto the trailhead just as headlights rolled toward us. Travis and Jordan burst out seconds later, wild-eyed, frozen with fear. A ranger truck rumbled to a stop. The ranger leaned out, face drained of color. "You kids go off trail?" he asked. We nodded, shaking. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. "No one survives out there after dark," he said softly. "Not with how fast that thing learns." Huh? He didn't say what thing. He didn't need to. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man between the trees, head bent, coat unmoving. Footprints forming in front of him, like the snow wasn't snow at all, but a sheet of paper he was drawing on. By the 4th night, the adrenaline crash hit, and I cracked. Full body shaking, shallow breathing, hands trembling so badly I spilled water all over my kitchen counter. I kept hearing echoes, little half sounds around my apartment that mirrored things I'd done earlier. A dropped spoon, a zipper, a cough. I convinced myself it was the upstairs neighbor. I needed that lie, like oxygen. Travis texted once. "You good?" I didn't answer. Jordan tried to call. I let it ring. Something about hearing their voices, voices that the woods had already worn, like masks, felt unbearable. By the end of the week, the nightmares started. It always began the same way. I stood at the edge of the tree line, the snow flat and quiet. Then a single footprint appeared, then another. And then my own voice, my broken panic attack voice slipping between the branches like a thread of smoke. When I woke up drenched in sweat, my phone would buzz on the nightstand. No caller ID. Just silence on the other end. One night I said, "Hello?" And the voice that answered was mine. Breath for breath. I threw the phone across the room. After that, I stopped sleeping altogether. I tried everything: white noise, melatonin, staying up with lights on, but my mind kept circling the same wrong truth. That thing hadn't chased us out of the woods. It had just started learning. The first real sign happened 9 days after Frostline Ridge. I woke to the faintest knock at my front door. 3 taps, evenly spaced. My heart climbed into my throat. I checked the peephole. No one. But on the floor, resting perfectly centered on the doormat, sat a single boot print melted into the snow that wasn't there 10 seconds earlier. My boot print. Size, tread, shape, angle mine. I locked every deadbolt I had. I didn't leave the house for 2 days. When I finally worked up the courage to step out, I made it halfway down the apartment walkway before a shape flickered in the corner of my eye behind the tree line across the parking lot. A silhouette. Lean. Still. Watching. I didn't wait to see if the head would tilt. I sprinted back inside, slammed the door, pressed my spine against it until my breathing slowed. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. A voicemail transcribed itself on my screen. "Tay, Elu, come back." I deleted it. It reappeared 30 seconds later, identical. After the 4th time, I threw my phone in the trash. I lasted 2 weeks, before desperate silence drove me back to the woods. Travis refused to go with me. Jordan wouldn't even meet my eyes. So I drove alone, the steering wheel slick beneath my sweating palms. The sky was heavy with low clouds, gray and swollen like the world was holding a breath. Frostline Ridge looked exactly the same, quiet, white, observing. I stood at the trailhead and whispered, "Why me?" Snowflakes drifted sideways, dissolving as they touched my coat. For a second I thought, maybe I'd imagined everything. Maybe trauma echoes, until you mistake it for footsteps. Then something answered. Not words. Not a scream. A breath. My breath. From 10 feet, inside the trees. I froze. The cold sliced straight into my lungs. The trees shifted, opening a narrow line of sight. A shape stood between the firs, my height, my posture, my outline. It moved its arm a second after I moved mine. A delayed mirror. Learning. I whispered, "Stop." The figure whispered too. The same tone, the same quiver, the wrong delay. Snow muffled the sound, swallowing the end of the word. I backed away 1 step. It stepped forward, 1 step. Not perfectly, but close. I turned and ran, boots slipping on the icy path, breath ripping in and out of my throat. Something trailed me, matching pace, refining the rhythm of my footfalls, adjusting its breath to sync with mine like it wanted to become a second shadow. I didn't look back. I crashed into my car, fumbled the keys, peeled out so fast the wheels screamed. When I reached town, the sun was already dying behind the mountains. The sky turned red, then purple, then black. Streetlights flickered on, like tired sentries. And then, as I backed into my parking space, I heard it. A voice drifting from the line of trees behind my building. My voice. Perfect now. Nearly indistinguishable. "Taylor." I slammed the car door shut, breath shaking out of me in broken bursts. My apartment window reflected my face, but for a split second, The expression staring back wasn't mine. It was practiced, as if someone else had worn it first. That night, I slept on the living room floor with every light on. I woke at 3:11 a.m. Mine 2-3 taps on the window, soft, even, rehearsed. I didn't check. I didn't need to, because the voice that followed was my own, whispered through the glass with flawless cadence. Let me in. And the worst part? It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded patient, eager, still learning, still improving, still coming. And one day, maybe soon, it will say my name with absolutely no mistakes. I knew something was wrong the moment Buster lifted his head from the blanket and stared at the heating vent, like it had whispered his name. That was January 11th, the second week after I'd moved into the old white farmhouse on Harper Mill Road in Grafton, Vermont, a place I'd chosen because silence felt like the only thing still capable of holding me together. Deadlines, burnout, a breakup I didn't talk about, a creeping sense that my life had shrunk without me noticing, the usual quiet disasters. A remote winter rental felt like a reset, a place where snow softened everything sharp. It was a still day, the kind where sound gets swallowed before it escapes your throat. Snow stacked high along the porch rails, the pine trees bent with the weight of last night's storm, and everything smelled like cold stone and chimney smoke. I'd told myself the isolation would help me right. I'd told myself I wasn't afraid of being alone. Then the emergency alert cracked through the quiet, sharp, metallic, too loud for the room. Escaped convict Silas Vane, last seen near Route 5, armed, extremely dangerous. I stood in the kitchen staring at the screen until it dimmed on its own, like the phone was tired of waiting for my reaction. My breath puffed in little clouds. The farmhouse always ran cold, even with the heat on. Buster pressed against my leg, sensing whatever shift had just taken place in me. I convinced myself the warning was irrelevant. Route 5 was miles away. Besides, the landlord, Mr. Leeds, told me the place had been empty for months. No one came up this road unless they meant to. By dusk, fat snowflakes drifted past the window like ash. I made tea, wrapped myself in a thermal blanket, and tried to focus on work. The power flickered twice, then died completely. The farmhouse sighed into the dark. Great, I muttered into the empty air. Real cozy now. I lit 2 candles, their flames trembling in the drafty air. The smell of melting wax mixed with the cold metal scent of the vents. Buster paced circles near the bed. I tried to write anyway, typing as the laptop battery ticked slowly down. But my mind kept drifting to the alert. That's when Buster froze, hackles up, a soft growl rumbling out of him like a warning meant for someone else. He stared at the vent beside the bed, the old cast iron kind with wide slats and screws rusted to the color of dried blood. Buddy, what is it? My voice came out too soft, too breathy. He didn't blink. I leaned in, bracing my hand on the mattress, and angled my ear toward the grate. At first, I heard nothing but the faint hiss of cooling pipes. Then so close I felt it before I understood it came a deep inhale, a long, wet exhale. Someone breathing in rhythm, slow and deliberate, like they were trying not to be heard. I jerked back so fast I knocked the candle into the wall. Wax splashed. The flame jittered. No, I whispered. No, no, no. But then a voice slipped through the vent, thin, ragged, spoken like a man talking to himself in a dark room. Almost. I slapped my hand over my mouth. Buster barked once, a sharp, terrified sound, then back toward the far wall, tail tucked so tight it nearly disappeared. My pulse hammered against my jaw. I grabbed the fireplace poker from the hearth and dragged the heavy dresser in front of the bedroom door, scraping grooves into the wood floor. The metal felt icy in my hands, grounding and nauseating at the same time. The breathing faded. Nothing else moved. For an hour, then 2, the farmhouse groaned in the wind. Snow hissed against the siding like sand poured through a funnel. I kept the poker aimed at the vent, afraid to blink. Then tap. A soft, careful lift of the grate. like someone testing how securely it was screwed down. Tap. A click, as it fell back into place. I swallowed so hard my throat burned. "Stay with me, Buster," I whispered, curling my hand around his collar. The tapping came again, a little harder, a little more confident. The night felt endless. Wind, snow, the soft scrape of something shifting beneath the floorboards. Every so often, the breathing returned, sometimes slow, sometimes frantic, as if the person beneath us was wrestling with the ductwork. Sometime near dawn, the vent went still, completely still. No tapping, no breathing, no scraping, which, somehow, was worse. When I finally heard tires crunch across the driveway, I almost cried. I pulled aside the curtain. Mr. Leeds's truck, 2 officers behind him. I unblocked the door, nearly tripping over the dresser in my haste. When I opened the door, cold air ripped through the hallway, like the house exhaled for the first time all night. "You all right, miss?" one officer asked, already scanning the room. I heard someone. He was under the house, in the vents. My voice cracked. He was breathing, whispering. The officers exchanged a look I've seen only on people trying to hide. "They're taking you seriously." Outside, the sun was a weak smear behind the storm clouds. Snow drifts piled high around the cellar doors. That's when I saw the footprints. Bare, large, toes splayed, heel deep dents, like each step was taken in frantic haste. They led straight to the cellar doors and none led away. One officer knelt beside the prints, touching the edges. "Recent. Maybe hours. You sure you didn't hear him go back out?" "He never left," I said. "He was down there, all night." The officer hesitated. Barefoot in a storm like this, he'd be half frozen. I didn't say what I was thinking, that insanity and desperation can keep a person moving long after their body should have quit. They unlatched the cellar doors. The hinges screamed. A rush of air rolled upward, cold, moldy, damp, like a breath exhaled from the bottom of a grave. Their flashlights cut through the dark, beams catching on insulation dangling from the ceiling. Old crates, disturbed dust. "Christ," one murmured. "Someone's been living down here." There were flattened patches in the insulation where a body had rested, a trail of smudges along the ductwork where hands had gripped metal, scattered bits of packaging, shredded cloth, a nest built out of my old moving boxes I swore I'd left sealed. And near the far wall, half buried in dust, something small glinted under the flashlight beam. Mr. Leeds reached for it. "Is this yours?" I felt the blood drain from my face. My missing earring. A simple silver stud I'd chalked up as lost during unpacking. But it wasn't lost. It had been taken. Which meant the man Silas Vane or whoever lurked beneath my floors had been in the house long before the storm. Long before last night. Maybe watching me through vents while I worked. Maybe creeping up when I slept. Maybe testing ways in, night after night. "Officers," Mr. Leeds said quietly, "you should call for backup." They swept the basement, guns drawn, but there were no other footprints, no signs of exit. Just the cold, the scattered debris, the proof that someone had made a home in the bones of the house. "He's not here," one officer finally said, "and not out there either." The silence beneath that conclusion was unbearable, as if the house was holding a secret, as if it had swallowed him whole. They told me to pack a bag and leave for a few days. The storm had lightened, but my hands shook so hard I dropped half the things I tried to grab. Buster paced circles around me, whining softly, refusing to go near any vent. Mr. Leeds helped me carry things to the car, his breath fogged out in quick bursts. "I'm real sorry, Chloe. I had no idea anyone could get under there." "I heard him," I whispered. He whispered things through the vent. He breathed like he was right beside me. He said almost, like he was close to something. Mr. Leeds hesitated. Sometimes in old houses, sound travels. Not like this. My voice snapped sharper than I intended. He was inches away. He nodded slowly, not pushing further. As I drove down the long, snow-packed road, I couldn't stop imagining the vent slats lifting fraction by fraction. The dark behind them, the breath of a stranger filling my room. I stayed in a motel for 3 nights. Slept with the TV on. Buster pressed against my ribs like he could keep my heart inside my body. The officers checked in once, no updates. They never caught Silas Vane. When I finally returned to the farmhouse to gather the rest of my things, the cellar doors were nailed shut. New locks on every window. The vents screwed tight. The house was silent, except for the wind. But as I walked through the bedroom, a faint metal creak came from the vent, just a soft settling. I told myself, old houses make sounds. Pipes shift. Metal contracts. Still, I froze. Because the sound wasn't random. It had rhythm. Tap. A pause. Tap, tap. Like someone testing the screws again. I backed toward the hallway, heart thudding against my throat. Buster growled low, staring at the vent with the same fear from that first night. Outside, another storm was rolling in. Wind rising, snow thickening, air tightening the way it does before something breaks. And sometimes, when winter settles heavy on the roof and the vents expand and groan, I swear I hear it again. The slow inhale, the wet exhale, the whisper meant only for me. As if the house remembers him. As if he remembers me. And as the vents creak in the dark, I can't help but feel that he's still down there somewhere, almost close enough. Almost. The night I took the wrong exit off Winterbridge Road. It felt less like a mistake and more like something nudging my hand on the wheel. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't exhausted, just impatient to get home after visiting my sister in Helena. The whiteout had swallowed the road so completely that my headlights felt like candles pushed against a waterfall. Snow hammered the windshield in sideways sheets, and the wipers kept smearing more than clearing. I kept thinking about how my sister had begged me to stay another night. It's Montana, Leah. Winter doesn't negotiate. She said it with that older sister mix of love and condescension. I laughed it off. I had work in the morning. I had a life to get back to. But 20 minutes after leaving, the GPS froze, screen flickering like a dying eye before it went black entirely. My breath hitched. I tapped it, shook it, cursed at it. Nothing. I slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. The storm kept thickening, as if I had driven into a snow-filled throat. All I could see was white, 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 endless and weightless, the kind of white that makes you forget there's a world outside of it. That's when I saw the glow. It rose out of the snowstorm like a lantern held by an unseen hand, a warm, amber light at the end of a narrow road I didn't remember turning onto. I should have questioned it, but when your options shrink to follow the light or die in a frozen ditch, instinct wins. I edged forward. The house emerged slowly, like a photograph developing from gray paper. 2 stories. Wooden, boarded windows except one. A thin string of smoke curled from the chimney as if someone had just fed the fire. My pulse skittered. Something felt off, and it wasn't just the storm. I couldn't name it yet, just a cold tug behind my ribs. I nearly pulled away until a set of headlights filled my rearview mirror. A truck. It slid to a stop behind me. The window rolled down and a man leaned out, face red from the cold, hair plastered to his forehead by the wind. "You lost?" he shouted. "They'll help you in there. Storm's getting worse." His cheerfulness cut against the night like a knife. Too casual. Too eager. Before I could respond, he rolled his window up and reversed back into the whiteness. Swallowed instantly. I didn't like it. None of it. But the wind jolted my car, rocking it, reminding me I didn't have choices, just varying degrees of risk. So I grabbed my coat, shoved the door open, and trudged toward the house. Snow clawed at my ankles. The cold sliced through my jeans like needles. I knocked once. The door opened immediately. A woman in a thick gray shawl stood there, her face pale but smiling politely, as though she had been standing behind the door waiting. "Storm will take you if you stay out, honey. Come in." Her voice was soft, oddly warm. I stepped inside before I could think twice. Heat wrapped around me like a blanket. The air smelled of pine and something else metallic, faintly sweet. A fire crackled in the living room. A teenage boy sat at a wooden table, stirring a bowl of soup with slow, precise movements. He didn't look at me, not even a glance, just kept stirring. "Rough night to be driving," the woman said, closing the door behind me with finality. She guided me toward the fire with a gentle but insistent hand between my shoulders. "Sit. Warm up." "Thank you," I murmured, pulling off my gloves. "I just need directions back to the highway, once the storm." A man stepped into the room, wiping his hands on a cloth the color of dried cherries. "You'll stay the night," he said flatly. Not a suggestion. My heart thumped once. Hard. I appreciate it, but I just need a map. Or maybe a phone charger. "No phones," the woman said. "Storm. Knocks them out." The teenager's spoon clicked against the bowl's edge. A small, repetitive sound. He still hadn't looked up. My stomach tightened. The room felt staged, too warm, too tidy for a house with boarded windows. Even the fire seemed to burn oddly still, like the flames were resisting a breeze I couldn't feel. My gaze drifted to the photographs on the wall, dozens of them. Families standing in front of snowy landscapes. But their faces, every single one, were blurred, smeared, or fogged over. At first I thought it was just old film damage, but then I noticed the blur moved very slightly when I looked at it directly, like breaths caught behind glass. The boy finally spoke, voice so small it sounded borrowed. "Don't let them touch you." His spoon stilled. He still didn't look up. A heartbeat of silence. The man and woman didn't react. They just stared. A pressure built at the back of my neck. I stood abruptly. I should get going. "Thank you for the warmth." The front door slammed shut, with a force that rattled the frame. I hadn't touched it. The storm outside wailed against it, but the sound had a rhythm, 3 knocks, an unnatural cadence. The woman's shawl slipped slightly as she stepped toward me. The skin on her neck, charred white and branching patterns, looked like frostbite scars that hadn't healed correctly. "If you open that door," she whispered, "the storm will take what it's owed." The boy's spoon clattered to the floor. "Run," he whispered. "Now." The light snapped off. Something huge shifted in the hallway, dragging itself across the walls with a wet, heavy scrape. I bolted. I didn't think, just ran. My legs moved on panic alone, crashing through the dark toward what I hoped was the kitchen. The house groaned behind me, beams flexing like ribs about to crack. The air thickened, colder than outside, as if the storm had seeped into the walls. My fingers found a counter edge. Then the back door. I twisted the latch. It stuck frozen or jammed, but I slammed my shoulder into it with everything I had. The door burst open, and night exploded around me in a flurry of snow and black wind. I stumbled outside, sinking to my knees in a drift so deep it swallowed my boots. The cold knifed straight through my bones. Behind me, the house moaned long and low, like something inside it was stretching itself awake after years of sleep. I forced myself up, lungs burning, and slogged toward the faint outline of the road. The wind roared, but within it I heard something else, something that mimicked breath. Then footsteps, not soft, not human, drags, long, uneven drags pulling closer. "Don't look back," I muttered, choking on my own breath. "Don't look." A loud crack ripped through the night. I whipped around to spite myself. The house was splitting. Wood beams snapped, windows burst outward, boards flew into the storm like broken wings. Shadows spilled onto the snow, stretching unnaturally far, too thin, too tall. One of them moved with a stagger that made my stomach flip. The others followed, jerking, reaching, crawling over the threshold as if reborn into the cold. I ran. Every step felt like wading through concrete. The wind shoved against me in violent gusts, shrieking in my ears like it wanted inside my skull. My lungs screamed for warmth. My skin prickled with the certainty that if a hand, any hand, touched me, I would never see sunrise. I don't know how long I ran. Maybe minutes, maybe years. But eventually a bright light loomed through the blizzard, orange, mechanical, steady, a plow truck. I staggered into its path, waving both arms. "Stop, please stop." It screeched to a halt. The driver jumped out, face stark with shock. "Jesus, lady, what the hell are you doing out here? There's no houses for miles." I collapsed against the truck, sobbing in a way I don't remember choosing. He hauled me inside, cranked the heat, kept glancing at me like I might disappear. When we circled back at dawn, the storm gone, the world quiet, there was nothing. No house, no boards, no footprints except mine. Just a flat indentation in the snow. "See?" he said gently, like comforting a child. "No house." I stared at the empty space for so long. He eventually drove me home just to get me warm again. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined everything, that stress and fear and winter had warped my mind. That people don't just blur out of photographs and houses don't breathe, and shadows don't chase you through storms. But that night, when I emptied my coat pocket to dry it, a small metal clink hit the floor. A spoon. Still warm. The boys. I stared at it until my vision blurred, until my skin crawled with the certainty that warmth meant it hadn't been in my pocket long. Something had held it last. Recently. Now, whenever storms roll through my town and the wind leans hard against the doorframe, I hear it again. 3 soft knocks, as if the house is asking me to come back and finish what the cold began. I knew something was wrong the moment the wind changed direction. That abrupt, unnatural pivot that made the back of my neck prickle as if someone had stood behind me and breathed against my skin. We were halfway up Crescent Peak Trail, me and my boyfriend, Ethan, who swore this would be a quick winter hike. I'd agreed only because he was finally home for a long weekend, and because the sky had been so impossibly clear when we parked the car that morning. If there's one thing Oregon winters teach you, it's that clear skies are lies. "Hey, Jules," he'd teased, nudging my shoulder. "You're acting like the trees are gonna mug us." "I'm acting like the weather hates me," I replied, and he laughed, leaning in for a fast kiss before trudging ahead, boots crunching on the crusted snow. I remember that sound clean, rhythmic, safe. 10 minutes later, it was gone. It started as a low hiss, like a warning, whispered through the pines. Then the temperature dropped so fast it felt like my breath turned heavy, metallic. I tightened the hood of my jacket. Ethan was still a few steps ahead, red backpack bright against the white trail. I opened my mouth to call to him, but the wind struck first. The microburst hit like a thrown wall, a violent sheet of snow and sound that slapped me sideways. My eyes stung, my ears rang. The trail vanished, sucked into white. Ethan's outline dissolved in a blink. "Ethan," I screamed, but the wind swallowed his name, shredded it. A heartbeat later, I heard him shout, "Jules, stay put." His voice was faint, thinning in the storm. But panic cracked through all logic. Maybe it was the sudden silence after his shout, or the way the snow moved in frantic, swirling patterns that made me feel watched. I stepped forward just one step, and the wind pushed me deeper, like it wanted me. "Ethan," I screamed again. Nothing. Visibility shrank to a few feet. The trees were dark ghosts. The snow stung my cheeks like needles. Every inhale tasted like cold metal. My boots slid on ice, and I stumbled onto what felt like packed, uneven ground. When I blinked the snow from my eyes, I realized I was standing on old railroad cuts, abandoned logging tracks, sunk deep into the forest floor. They ran crookedly through the trees like an exposed spine. Relief flashed, but it died the second I saw the sign nailed to a leaning pine. "Keep out. Trespassers will be removed." The word "removed" was gouged deeper than the rest, as if rewritten with shaking, angry hands. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered, but the wind took even that. Something red steamed against the snow beside the tracks. The half-torso of a deer, neatly severed, as if the top and bottom had simply stopped belonging to each other. No tracks, no drag marks, no blood trail leading anywhere, just a single, perfect slice clean through. My stomach lurched. I backed away, heart thundering. Anything could cut a deer in half, anything with a reason to hide. Jules. 1. I spun. It wasn't Ethan's voice. Softer. Lower. Too close. My breath stuttered. Who's there? I tried to shout, but the storm stole the volume. Branches cracked overhead. Snow fell in heavy clumps. The cold was eating through my coat, numbing my fingertips, slowing my thoughts. Hypothermia. Stupid. You know the signs. The rational part of me insisted. But another part whispered that something was inside this storm, moving just out of sight. I forced myself toward the faint sound of running water, Crescent Creek. If I could find the creek, I could find my way back to the main trail. That was what the ranger had told us years ago. If you get lost, follow the water down. The snow got deeper. My legs trembled. My teeth chattered so hard it hurt. The world blurred, softened. I kept seeing movement in my periphery. Dark shapes sliding between trees, vanishing when I turned. My mind tried to tell me they were branches, shadows, illusions born of cold. But each time, I felt that same prickling, being watched. Just when my legs buckled, I saw a wire fence, barely visible through the flurries. Beyond it, a single cabin with a lantern burning in the window. Soft, golden, impossibly warm against the white chaos. I dragged myself forward, palms scraping the fence, until a figure pushed open the door. "Get in here," a man shouted, his voice cracking like old timber. I stumbled inside. Heat smacked me. The man, Old Man Ellis, I realized from a faded sign on his shelf, wrapped me in layers of wool blankets. "Storm will think for you if you're not careful," he muttered. "Let it, and it'll take you." I tried to tell him about Ethan, about the tracks, about the deer, about the sign, but my words slurred. My mouth felt wrong. Ellis pushed a cup of something warm to my lips and said, "You're freezing. We'll talk later. Rest." I didn't rest. I slipped under. The storm roared outside, and beneath it, so faint I thought I imagined it. I heard footsteps crunching along those logging tracks. When I woke, the lantern was dimmer, and the storm had calmed into a restless whisper. Ellis stood near the window, mug in hand, staring out into the early morning gray. For a moment, I didn't move. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. A sharp ache pulsed along my fingertips. I lifted my hands out of the blankets. 3 fingers were darkening blackish at the tips. Frostbite. "Where's Ethan?" I whispered, throat raw. Ellis didn't turn. "Didn't see anyone with you. You wandered alone." I didn't wander, I snapped, but the words came out fragile. He was ahead of me. The storm separated us. "Storm will do that." His voice was too even, too quiet. I pushed myself upright. My head swam. "I need to go find him." "You step outside now. You'll pass out before you hit the creek." He sipped his drink. "Search and rescue's been alerted. They'll sweep the ridge." "How?" I croaked. "We didn't have signal. My phone died." "Radio." He finally turned, his eyes a pale gray. "You should stay put until they call back." Something in his expression, careful, assessing, sent a ripple of unease down my spine. "I need to hear that call," I said. "Later," he replied. I swallowed hard. Ellis. On the tracks there was a sign, and a deer. It was, "Don't go near those tracks." He cut in, too quickly. "Old land, old business, not yours." A tremor moved through me. "What kind of business?" "Not yours," he repeated, more sharply. I stared at him, waiting for more. None came. Over the next hour, I fought to stay awake as he checked the stove, stepped outside twice, and paced the small cabin like a man waiting for something. Each time he cracked open the door, I caught a glimpse of the trees, dark, heavy, leaning inward. And each time, I heard it again, that faint crunch of snow. Slow, deliberate, not Ellis's pace, something softer, closer. At one point, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. "You heard things last night," he said without looking at me. "Storm plays tricks, makes you think you're being followed." "I know what I heard," I whispered. "You don't," he said, and stepped outside again. I timed it. He stayed out longer than before, almost 10 minutes. I forced myself out of the blankets, legs shaking as I approached the window. The cold glass stung my palm. Through it, I saw the faint outline of those same logging tracks beyond the tree line. And something moved along them. Not a person, too smooth, too gliding. Taller than a deer, but its posture was wrong. Head low, back arched, limbs bending like it didn't understand how joints worked. I blinked hard. The shape vanished. My breath fogged the glass. "Ethan," I whispered, as if saying his name might anchor me to reality. When Ellis returned, snow clung to his boots higher than before. His jaw was clenched. "They found him," he said. I froze. "Where?" "On the trailhead, frostbitten, disoriented, alive." He folded his arms. "You'll meet him at the ranger station." Relief detonated in my chest, but it didn't settle. Something was off. Ethan would have never found his way up the trail alone. Not in that storm, not without me. But Ellis was already grabbing his coat. "We go now," he said. He helped me outside. The sky was pale blue, deceptively peaceful. The storm had smoothed everything, no tracks, no sign, no deer, no proof of anything. The air smelled too clean. As we walked, I glanced once toward the logging tracks. Snow shifted between the trees, sinking slowly as if something large moved beneath it. Ellis gripped my elbow. "Don't look there." I tried to pull away. "Why not?" "Because it looks back," he said simply. The ranger truck met us half a mile down. Ethan ran toward me, wrapped me in a grip so tight it hurt. His face was wind-burned, eyes swollen from sobbing or cold, I couldn't tell which. I buried my face in his chest, letting warmth be the only truth. But when I pulled back, his voice shook. "Jules, I swear something was following me. I heard it. I kept hearing you calling my name, but it wasn't your voice." I stared at him, the world tilting, a slow, nauseating spin. Ellis cleared his throat. "Your minds were playing tricks on you. Storm will do that." But Ethan wasn't looking at Ellis. He was staring at the ridge. And just before the rangers drove us away, I heard it again, faint, distant, carried on the thinning wind. A single crunch, then another. Steady, slow, following the logging tracks, waiting for the next fool who wanders off trail. I was signing the last divorce paper when I realized my hand was shaking too hard to keep the pen steady. Not from sadness, that part had burned out months ago, but from the nauseating quiet of finally being done. The attorney's office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet cleaner. A heater hummed behind me, blowing warm air that somehow didn't reach my fingers. When I handed the pen back, my ex-husband, Grant, didn't look at me. He just muttered, "Good luck, Mara," like a man offering condolences at a funeral he didn't really want to be at. The drive afterward felt heavier than the meeting itself. My boxes were already in the trunk, sweaters, notebooks, 2 mugs, a chipped plate from my first apartment, the leftovers of a life divided by court paperwork. I didn't say goodbye to the house we'd been renting. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't for a long time. I drove north until the roads narrowed, and the scenery shifted from suburbs to long, bending tree lines. Snow peppered the windshield in soft bursts. The sky was colorless. Everything felt like a blank page I wasn't sure how to write on. By the time I reached Barrow Ridge, Pennsylvania, the radio static had grown louder than the stations. The GPS flickered before finally announcing, "Arrived." 118W. Hemlock Street stood crooked under the dim afternoon light, its porch sagging slightly, its windows too small for the size of the antique shop beneath. Crescent Fold Antiques was printed on the front door in flaking gold paint. Inside, The smell of old varnish and cedar oil hit me instantly. Mr. Dalton appeared behind the counter, wiping his hands on a frayed cloth. He was wiry, maybe mid-60s, with a face that looked carved from winter bark. "You must be the renter," he said. "Storm's coming tonight. One of the mean ones." "That's what I hear," I replied, though I hadn't heard anything. I didn't know anyone here yet. He led me up the narrow staircase behind the shop. Each step creaked under our weight. The attic door stuck slightly before he nudged it open with his hip. It's small, but it's warm. When the heater behaves. The room was bigger than I expected, slanted wooden ceilings, a single dormer window, and a floor that sloped downward just enough to make a marble roll on its own. The air tasted metallic, like the tang of cold batteries. Dust softened the corners of the room, as if nothing had moved here for years. His nephew, Tom, arrived with the last of my boxes. He couldn't have been older than 25, with dark hair falling into his eyes and hands wrapped in fingerless gloves. "Let me get that for you," he said, setting the box down gently. His eyes flicked toward the window, then away so quickly I almost missed it. "You lived here long?" I asked. He hesitated. "My whole life. Ever had renters up here before?" His jaw tightened. "A few." Mr. Dalton shot him a look I didn't understand, something between warning and plea. "I'll leave you to settle," he said, forcing a smile. "Call if the pipes bother you." When the door closed behind them, the quiet pressed in. I let myself breathe for the first time all day. I unpacked slowly, sweaters on the shelf, notebooks stacked on the desk, the chipped plate leaning against the wall. By nightfall, the wind outside tapped softly at the attic window. Not loud. Just enough that I noticed it was rhythmic. I told myself, old buildings always made strange noises. But that first night, as I lay on the mattress and listened to the cold hum around the window frame, a distinct knock echoed from inside the wall. 1, 2, 3. Paused. Then again. I held still, listening to my pulse tick in my throat. The knocking stopped only when the heater kicked on with a metallic groan. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, Mr. Dalton was dusting a row of carved figurines when I asked, "Is the attic noisy for everyone?" He paused longer than necessary. "The building just has history," he said. "You'll get used to her." Her? He pretended not to hear me. Tom arrived from the back door carrying a box of winter coats they were prepping for sale. When he passed me, he murmured under his breath, "Don't worry about the noises. It's just drafts." "Drafts don't knock," I said. His face paled. "You heard knocking?" Mr. Dalton cut in sharply. "Tom, stockroom, now." Tom disappeared without looking back. The day dragged into a gray, cold evening. I ate microwaved soup in front of the attic window, listening to the wind thrum against the glass. When I finally lay down to sleep, the vent near my bed rattled softly. I rolled over, telling myself it was just the heater. Then I heard it. A whisper, not a word yet, just a breath drawn into shape. My heart stuttered. Another whisper, faint but unmistakably human. "Ma." I sat upright, gripping the blankets. The vent was still, the heater silent. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, the dormer window was cracked open, snow crusting the floor in a thin print, a bare foot, small and arched, toes tapering perfectly. No sock, no shoe. I backed away until my spine hit the opposite wall. When I told Mr. Dalton, he didn't deny it. He didn't even ask if I was sure. He just whispered, "Keep the window locked. Even if you think you didn't touch it, keep it locked." "What's going on up there?" I asked. He didn't answer. Tom avoided me all day. The whispers grew bolder the following night. Not just syllables now, but breathing, pacing, the soft drag of skin across wood. Something moved in the dark corner near the window, a shift in the air, like someone inching closer. I slammed on the lamp. Nothing. But the window latch was unhooked again,
The third night, a new sound joined the whisper's footsteps on the stairwell at an hour when no one should have been awake. Slow, deliberate. A woman's steps, heavy on the ball of the foot. They stopped just outside the attic door. The handle twitched. My breath caught. The footsteps retreated only when the temperature dropped so sharply, my breath turned into a white cloud above the blankets. By February 9th, I hadn't slept more than a few hours in days. My reflection in the attic mirror looked like someone who had lived inside a storm. Dark circled eyes, brittle expression, hair static charged from dry air and stress. I tried calling Grant once, stupidity or desperation. I didn't know, but he didn't answer. I was alone, and something knew it. That night, the blizzard arrived like an avalanche of white noise. Wind battered the siding. Snow hammered the roof. The lights flickered as the house groaned under the weight of winter. When the power died completely, darkness rushed into the attic like a tide. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me. Frost crawled up the inside of the window pane, growing in jagged veins. The attic door creaked. A voice pressed against the wood, soft, feminine, trembling with fury. "You took my room. You took my room." The doorknob turned. I bolted across the floor, slipping on patches of ice forming beneath my feet. The door slammed open behind me, the sound cracking through the attic like a rifle shot. An icy force whipped across my back, flinging my hair forward. I dashed down the stairs, gripping the rail so hard I felt splinters dig into my palm. Behind me, the cold followed a living thing, sharp enough to burn. "Help," I shouted. No answer. The shop below was dark. Shelves cast giant, warped shadows. The front door wouldn't budge, snow was piled against it from outside. Something moved on the steps above, descending. Slowly, deliberately. I ran to the back exit, slammed my shoulder into it until it finally cracked open. Cold night air swallowed me. Snow blindsided my face. I stumbled into the alley, choking on the icy wind. Then footsteps barefoot. Light, quick, followed me outside. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the street, my lungs burning, my fingers numb, my breath cutting out in ragged bursts. Someone shouted my name, real this time, not whispered, and I turned to see Tom, half-coated, snow in his hair. He grabbed my arm. "We have to go. Now." Mr. Dalton appeared behind him, flashlight in hand, face ashen. "I told you to lock the window." "I did," I whispered. "It opens itself." Their expressions told me everything. They'd known, and they feared her. I never returned to the attic. Never collected my things. Never asked for my deposit. But leaving didn't help. A week after moving into a cramped apartment 3 towns away, I woke to find a thin dusting of powder on my living room floor. Not snow-plaster dust in the shape of a bare foot, toes pointed toward my bedroom. That night, at 3:14, a cold draft slid under the door. And from the corner of the dark, something exhaled softly. Mara. As if it had finally found where I ran. And was already learning the layout of my new home. The Christmas Eve, the world stopped feeling safe. I was setting out plates when I noticed the white van idling at the end of our cul-de-sac, silent, unlit, and wrong in a way I felt. Before I fully understood, snow drifted down in lazy spirals outside our home at 412 Merriweather Lane, in Brookhaven, Pennsylvania. The kind of soft winter curtain that usually makes the world feel wrapped, cocooned, distant. Inside, the house glowed warm cinnamon, pine, ham in the oven, everything you're supposed to feel grateful for. And I was grateful. I truly was. I'd worked so hard to build this softness. But even as the kids squabbled over gingerbread pieces and Daniel laughed under his breath, I kept glancing out the window, drawn back to that van like it had gravity. I told myself to let it go. Christmas Eve. People visit family. People get lost. but a tightness started forming between my ribs. That instinctive pinch of pay attention. I'd felt it before in small moments walking to my car at night, hearing footsteps behind me, or when the doorbell rang after 9 p.m. I always brushed it off. Tonight, the feeling wouldn't loosen. At 7:43 p.m., the knock came. It wasn't loud, just a steady 3-tap rhythm, patient and confident. I froze with my hand still on the silverware drawer. The kids fell silent. Even the refrigerator hum felt like it backed away from the sound. Daniel motioned for me to stay behind him, but something in me needed to see who was there, maybe because pretending nothing was off felt worse than confronting it. When I eased toward the door and looked through the peephole, 4 strangers stood on our porch. A tall man in a gray coat positioned front and center. The others fanned behind him like a formation, heads bowed slightly as if waiting for his cue. He smiled when he saw the shadow of my movement. "We're stranded," he said, voice steady, rehearsed. "We just need to come inside and warm up." Everything in his tone scraped wrong. Too smooth, too sure of my sympathy. I opened the door just 2 inches, enough that he could see my face but not my fear. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "We can't invite strangers in." His smile didn't fade, it only shifted. "We're delivering Christmas gifts." A lie. Swift. "We're with the church." Another. "We're lost." Too quick, too fluid, like he was testing which story would land. "I'm sorry," I repeated, firmer this time, and closed the door. My hands were shaking. I didn't want them to, but they were. Then, the circling began. It started with the crunch of footsteps on fresh snow, slow, sweeping arcs around the house. Not hurried, not shy. They were exploring, testing, learning the shape of our home through movement. Daniel peeked out the kitchen window, then backed away like the glass might suddenly give. I grabbed my daughter, pulling her close, feeling her pulse flutter against my wrist. We turned off the front lights, then the hallway lights. The house dimmed, shrinking into itself, but the dark didn't make me feel hidden. It made me feel exposed. A soft testing of the back door. A tap on the dining room window. A muffled laugh, quick, breathy, mean. My son whispered, barely audible, "Mom, someone's at my window." His room faced the side yard. A place no one should have been. I wanted to be steady for him. I wanted to be unshakable. But when I crept to his room and lifted the corner of the curtain, the breath left my body so quickly it stung. The woman from the group stood inches from the glass, face almost pressed to it, her breath fogging tiny shapes that expanded and contracted like lungs. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't shift. They were fixed on me, as though she knew I'd come to look. She lifted one finger and wrote a word in the condensation with a slow, deliberate drag. Soon, I stumbled back. Daniel grabbed my arm to keep me steady. The next 10 minutes stretched into something shapeless and cold. Every shadow felt inhabited. Every window felt vulnerable. The gray man's silhouette passed by the living room. Glass calm, methodical, like he was noting each potential entrance. Snow softened their footsteps, but not their presence. They moved with an unsettling, quiet precision, an eerie confidence. Daniel dialed 911 with shaking fingers, voice low and controlled. My heart beat so fast it felt like it was skipping steps. The operator's questions seemed too calm. Are they attempting entry? Are they armed? Has anyone spoken to you again? Questions meant for a world where situations made sense, where danger behaved in orderly lines. This didn't feel orderly. This felt rehearsed. When sirens finally echoed faintly through the neighborhood, the strangers didn't scatter. They simply melted into the night. One moment, silhouettes against snow. The next, gone, van gone. Footprints fading as if the snowfall were cooperating with them. By the time the officer stepped onto our porch, the yard was blank and quiet, almost peaceful. The word "soon" on the window had already begun to drip down into formless water. But the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place that had been mapped, marked, and chosen. Even after the officer left after his polite reassurances, After he shone his flashlight around as if light alone could erase what happened, I couldn't get warm. I wrapped myself in a blanket, sat at the edge of the couch, and watched snow collect along the window frames, burying the last evidence of their presence. Rebecca from next door texted asking if we were okay. She'd seen the flashing lights. I typed back a simple, flat, "We're fine." I didn't believe it. Daniel tried to normalize things. He coaxed the kids back to the table, reheated the ham, poured apple cider. But the warmth that had filled the house earlier, the softness, the holiday glow felt like it had slipped through a crack we couldn't seal. Our daughter wouldn't stop staring at her window, even with the blinds drawn. Our son sat rigid, fork untouched, listening for sounds only he could hear. Every clatter, every settling board of the house felt amplified. Maybe they really were lost, Daniel said quietly, not fully committing to the thought. "You don't circle a house like that when you're lost," I whispered. He didn't argue. His hand found mine under the table. It trembled slightly, betraying him. Later, after the kids were asleep in our room, after Daniel double-checked every lock, after I slid a chair beneath the front door handle like some fragile barricade, we lay in bed listening to silence, to wind, to our own shallow breaths. I kept replaying the woman's face against the glass, the blankness of her expression, the way her breath seemed too steady, too controlled, her fingertip dragging out that single word like a promise. Soon, I didn't sleep. Near midnight, I heard something so soft I thought I imagined it, a faint brushing sound, like fabric grazing wood. I pushed myself up, heart kicking hard, straining to hear. Daniel slept beside me, exhausted by the adrenaline crash. The brushing came again, then a whisper of footsteps across snow. I slipped out of bed. Every part of me said don't look, but I moved anyway, pulled by a terrible curiosity. I inched toward the living room, staying in the shadows, and peeked through the smallest crack in the curtain. The cul-de-sac was empty, completely still. But the snowfall was light and steady, and in the fresh layer closest to our porch, I saw 4 sets of footprints. Not approaching, leaving. Yet, none had been there when the officer searched. None had been there when the kids finally calmed. These were new. Hours old at most. I backed away from the window, breath stuttering. I didn't wake Daniel. I couldn't form the words. Instead, I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and watched the snow fill in the prints again, erasing the proof but not the reality. For the next week, I tried to move through life normally, school drop-offs, grocery runs, my remote work, yet the world had shifted. I noticed vans everywhere. I flinched at every knock. I kept checking the windows for messages that weren't there. Winter usually feels festive to me, but now the snow felt like insulation for danger, an invitation for things to come close without sound. Neighbors talked about petty theft, strangers walking dogs they didn't recognize, a cigarette butt on a porch that didn't belong to anyone, normal suburban unease. But I kept thinking about how calmly they'd moved, how coordinated, how certain. Not opportunists, not teenagers messing around. Something else. That second Friday after Christmas, at 9:14 p.m., another knock came. 3 taps, patient, confident. A rhythm I recognized instantly. Daniel froze. The kids watching a movie didn't notice. My pulse surged so violently it felt like pressure behind my eyes. I motioned for Daniel not to move, not to answer, not to breathe too loudly. We stood there for a full minute. Then 2. Then 5. No more knocks came. Eventually Daniel tiptoed to the peephole. No one stood there, but snowflakes drifted across a freshly drawn fingertip trail on the porch, railing long, slow strokes, as though someone had traced the wood while waiting. Daniel turned back to me, face pale. "They're messing with us." "No," I whispered. "They're reminding us." "Of what?" "That the first visit was not a fluke, not a coincidence, not over." A week later, the kids found something in the snow by the mailbox while making a snowman. A single scrap of paper, waterlogged but legible, tucked beneath the snow's surface like it had been protected. 4 letters, written in neat, deliberate strokes. Soon, Daniel burned it in the kitchen sink, but the smell lingered acrid, chemical, wrong. We didn't call the police this time. There was nothing to show them, nothing to explain, nothing that didn't sound like fear rattling itself apart. But every night since, the same thought tightens around my ribs as I lie awake listening to the winter wind. Not a knock, not a voice, just the promise. Soon. I was 35 the winter. An ice storm sealed every house on Redfern Road in a shimmering shell of silence. But I didn't understand what kind of silence it truly was until I stepped into Walt Higgins's doorway. The storm had started before sunrise, a slow, crystalline suffocation that turned the world glassy and brittle. By late afternoon, every mailbox on the street looked shrink-wrapped in clear plastic, and the air tasted like metal, from the downed power lines sagging like exhausted limbs. I'd been pacing my living room, watching my breath fog in the dimming daylight, when the thought of Walt's dark porch began pricking the edges of my conscience. His wife had died last year. He didn't leave the house much. And today, nothing. No porch light, no shuffle of blinds. No radio, murmuring through the wall between our houses. The guilt wouldn't let me sit still. I pulled on my coat, my boots, my scarf, none of it warm enough, and stepped outside into air so sharp it felt like it could shave the inside of my throat. The walkway crackled under each step, ice breaking like thin glass. The whole neighborhood looked frozen mid-breath. Every exhale turned to frost before it could reach the wind. Walt's house sat hunched at the corner lot, old and square, and wrapped in the kind of winter stillness that didn't feel natural. The porch steps were slick. My boot slipped once, forcing my hand to grip the frozen railing. When I reached the top, the porch creaked long, hollow, like wood in pain. I tried to knock, but the door drifted open with the pressure of my fingertips. Cold poured out of the house in waves. Not ordinary winter cold. This was deeper, older, the kind that felt like it had sunk into the walls, the floorboards, the air itself. A darkness lived inside it, dense enough to feel against my skin. "Walt?" I whispered, voice swallowed before it could travel. I stepped in. The smell hit me first, a thin, sterile cold, with something faintly metallic beneath it. The living room was dim, lit only by the gray daylight leaking through the iced-over windows, frost feathered across the picture frames. Walt and his wife smiled from behind that glass, forever stuck in a season warmer than this one. I closed the door behind me to keep out more cold, but it didn't matter. The house was colder inside than out. "Walt?" I tried again, louder this time. Footsteps shuffled somewhere down the hallway, slow, uneven, a sound like slippers dragging over a frozen floor. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong in that rhythm. Hesitant, searching. Then, he stepped out. Walt Higgins, 73 years old. Gray hair uncombed, robe hanging off him like he'd slept in it for a month. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Wide, red-rimmed, unsettled, as if his mind were trying to climb out of them. And in his trembling hand, pointed dead at my chest, was a revolver. "Don't move," he rasped. His voice sounded scraped raw. "You stay right there." "Walt, you're after Martha's things." His knuckles whitened around the grip. "I know who you are. I know why you came." For a moment, my world narrowed to the black circle of the barrel aimed at my heart. A cold sweat crawled up my spine. My pulse pounded so loud I could barely hear his breathing over it. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick, but I forced the words out slowly. "Walt, it's me. It's..." A tremor shot through his arm. The gun fired. The explosion cracked the air apart. My ears rang with a violent, high-pitched whine as the bullet tore into the ceiling, blasting apart plaster and raining down gray insulation like ashy snow. I flinched hard, instinctively crouching. The smell of burnt gunpowder rolled through the living room, hot, smoky, terrifyingly real. When I looked up, Walt was staring at the smoking barrel in horror, his entire body shaking. "See?" he whispered, voice breaking. See? You think I don't know? I know everything. My hands were up. My legs felt like water. Something primal inside me screamed to run, but I stayed still, forcing my breathing into slow, visible clouds. Walt, I'm not here to take anything. I came to check on you. His gaze flickered wildly. Liar. I'm not lying. You all want something, even Martha. His expression twisted grief, confusion, terror, all tangled into something fevered. She knows. She told me. My skin tightened. Walt, Martha passed away. His face collapsed into a tremble. No, she didn't. She's here. She's right in the other room. He jabbed the gun toward the hallway. You think I can't hear her? You think I don't know her steps? I swallowed air that felt colder than the night outside. This wasn't just confusion. It was a mind breaking under the weight of its own memories. Walt, I said softly, stepping an inch forward. It's freezing in here. Let me help you, please. He jerked, raising the gun again, finger trembling dangerously close to the trigger. Don't you dare take another step. Don't you? His knees buckled slightly. His shoulders sagged with the weight of confusion. His breath fogged in frantic bursts. And something in me shifted from fear to aching, helpless sorrow. I took another small step. Walt, look at me. He blinked, lost. It's cold, I said gently. Let's warm up. Let's turn the heat on. Let's sit down. I'll make tea. We can talk about Martha. You loved her a long time. His lip quivered. She called me today, he whispered. I heard her. She said not to trust you. My throat tightened. Walt, she didn't call. That was your memory. Grief can sound like a voice sometimes. It happens to a lot of people. Another step. You're not alone. Not tonight. He shook his head weakly, tears making his eyes gleam in the dim light. The gun lowered a fraction. Just a fraction, but enough. I took the last step. My chest brushed the barrel. The metal was ice cold, pressing against my sternum, a single point of freezing terror. Walt stared at the contact as if seeing it for the first time. His grip finally broke. The gun clattered to the floor, the echo sharp and hollow in the cold air. He sagged forward into my arms, sobbing like a child. I wrapped both arms around him, feeling his ribs shake beneath his thin robe, his breath cold against my neck. I know, I whispered. I know. It's okay. You're safe. But he wasn't. And deep down, I think we both knew that. I held him until the paramedics arrived, 20 minutes later, their boots leaving wet tracks across Martha's worn rug. They thanked me, quietly, professionally, but their eyes held something else. Pity, maybe, or the recognition of how close we'd come to witnessing a tragedy no one could have reversed. Walt was taken to a care facility that night. He never returned home again. In the weeks that followed, Red Fern Road thawed ice dripping from gutters, snow receding into brown patches of dead grass. Kids started sledding again. Neighbors walked their dogs. Life resumed. But my house never warmed the same way. Some nights, when the temperature drops and the lights flicker, the cold seeps back into the walls, sharp, unnatural, like the memory of a place that froze from the inside out. I'll hear the wind groan through the siding, low and mournful, and it sounds almost like a voice cracking under its own grief. And sometimes, God help me, I hear him. Martha? A whisper breaking on the other side, of a reality that slipped through his fingers long before that gun ever did. I was 30. The February I learned that wind can speak, though not in any way a sane person would ever want to hear. When the Halperns left me the keys to Hawthorne Lake Lodge, an aging, shuttered summer retreat swallowed by 6 feet of Maine snow, I told myself it would be peaceful. A little lonely, sure, but clean loneliness, the kind that lets you breathe. I'd been craving solitude, without realizing that solitude, in excess, begins talking back. The lodge sat on the north edge of the property, its facade half buried in drifts that curled like white dunes against the wooden siding. Inside, the air always smelled faintly of cedar and old coffee, like someone had just left the room. The silence felt padded, almost too soft. The kind of quiet you don't trust because it feels curated. Winter plays tricks out here, Mrs. Halpern had warned as she zipped her coat. Her husband nodded with a seriousness that made me laugh a little too loud. I was trying to seem braver than I felt. My last apartment had been noisy sirens, neighbors fighting, pipes clanking, but never empty. Never like this. The first 2 nights passed uneventfully. I read, organized supply closets, learned the quirks of the creaking floors. The cold pressed against the windows like a living animal. At times it felt as if the building breathed with me, exhaling frost through the vents. The 3rd night is when I heard it. My name drifting across Hawthorne Lake, stretched thin by distance. Liidda. At first, I thought it was the lake ice shifting. The Halperns mentioned it groaned sometimes, but there was a cadence almost musical, a drawn-out beckoning. It wasn't a sound that belonged to water or wind. The next morning, Jordan, the handyman, arrived with groceries and diesel cans. He was in his 40s, friendly enough, beard flecked with ice. "You look pale," he said, handing me the bag of apples. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" I asked casually, though my heart thudded. "Like what?" Someone calling." I forced a laugh. "Probably nothing." Jordan froze mid-step, calling, "Your name?" I nodded. His jaw tightened. "Don't answer it." I blinked. "What?" He looked toward the frozen lake. "Whatever calls from out there listens." His voice dropped, almost apologetic. "Just don't answer." I wanted to demand an explanation, but he was already walking back to his truck, boots crunching brittle snow. The engine echoed through the trees, fading until all I heard was the icy wind scraping against the siding. By dusk, the temperature had fallen steeply. The lodge crackled as wood contracted, whispering in long sighs. I told myself Jordan was superstitious. Everyone in remote winter towns had a story or two meant to scare outsiders. But as I tried to fall asleep, a thread of dread pulled through my chest. At 1:12 a.m., the voices returned. They weren't just saying my name. They were shifting, changing tone, gender, age. A child's pitch one moment, an old man's rasp the next. Once, I swear I heard my father's low hum, the same rhythm he used when fixing things around our childhood home. I sat up, pulse hammering. The floorboards below my bed shivered, then stilled. "Get a grip," I whispered to myself. "You're overtired." But the whisper of my father's hum repeated, this time from the vent beside me, that old tune he'd coined from thin air when concentrating. I shoved a pillow over the vent like a makeshift tourniquet, suffocating whatever sound remained. Morning didn't quiet the dread. The picture frames in the hall hung crooked, all tilted the same direction. The brass doorknobs felt warm when I touched them, as if someone had just been holding on from the other side. I tried calling Jordan, but the signal wavered, cutting out mid-ring. By night 5, the lodge had begun to feel aware. I'd say the word aware is dramatic, but there's no other way to describe how a building can tilt its breath to match yours. The air seemed to lean in. Surveillance, disguised as stillness. At 3 a.m., a soft knocking started beneath the floorboards, steady, polite, like someone waiting to be invited. Knock, knock, knock. A pause. Then, another series. I pressed my ear to the hardwood and felt vibrations, faint but intentional. Human, not animal, not ice. "Stop." My whisper trembled. "Please stop." The knocking didn't stop. When the storm finally rolled, in an enormous blizzard, roaring across the lake, everything escalated. The wind didn't howl. It spoke, repeating entire sentences I'd said earlier to myself. "I'm fine, Jordan. Be back soon." My own voice, thrown back at me with perfect inflection. By then, I couldn't deny that something inside Hawthorne Lake Lodge wanted me to respond. It wanted acknowledgement, validation, permission. I was fraying, nerves stripped raw. My mind circled itself, trying to logic away the illogical. But the voices pressed in with surgical precision. They knew what I sounded like. They knew where I slept. And, worst of all, they knew that I was listening. By the 10th night, sleep had abandoned me completely. My thoughts felt brittle, like thin ice ready to splinter. I tried keeping the generator shed lights on, tried pacing the halls, humming to drown out the noises, but the lodge absorbed every sound and returned them altered. When I muttered, "I'm losing it," the echo that answered came from the attic door, my own voice, but slightly delayed, like the lodge was practicing. "I'm losing it." I stepped back, throat tightening. "That's not funny." I snapped at the ceiling. My voice cracked. The echo mimicked the crack. I must have stood frozen for minutes. My breath fogged unevenly. My exhales were shaky, but the fog on the opposite side of the hall, it fluttered as though something else were breathing, too. By late evening, the storm outside became a living creature. Snow slammed against the windows with fists of wind. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped so sharply the glass frosted from the inside. I felt watched from every doorway. When the knocking under the floorboards resumed louder, insistent, I finally broke. I marched into the living room, heart pounding so hard my ribs hurt. "What do you want?" My voice tore through the lodge, raw and panicked. Instant silence. Not quiet. Not a pause. A carved-out void, as though the world muted itself mid-breath. My ears rang in the stillness. The hairs on my arms rose, prickling. Then, right behind my ear, so close that the warmth of phantom breath brushed my skin, I heard my exact voice whisper, "You." Every window in the room exploded inward at once. The blast was deafening. A spray of ice shards slashed through the air, glittering like shattered stars. I ducked instinctively, arms covering my face. The cold that rushed in wasn't natural. It felt like a force sliding along the walls, searching for something specific. The hallway groaned. Not the creak of wood, more like pressure, weight, as if something massive shifted inside the bones of the building. A long, low moan traveled through the structure, like it was speaking in a language older than the lake itself. I ran. Snow filled the hall, blown in through the broken windows. The floorboards bent beneath my feet, swelling upward as though something underneath them rose toward me. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. When I pushed open the back door, the wind nearly lifted me off my feet. Snow slammed into my face like shrapnel. I stumbled through knee-deep drifts toward the generator shed 50 yards away. Every step felt stolen. Behind me, the lodge groaned again, louder, closer, furious. The shed's door stuck, frozen at the hinges. I yanked until my palms burned. When it finally gave, I fell inside, slamming it shut. My breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the air. I pressed my back against the door, waiting for a knock. A footstep, a whisper. Nothing. Just the storm, battering the shed. The generator coughing in protest. I stayed there until the generator died 2 hours later. The darkness was total. Cold gnawed at my fingers, my boots, my resolve. I cried without sound. It took authorities 2 days to reach the property. They found me half-conscious, wrapped in tarps. They found the lodge half encased in drift ice. They found the windows shattered outward like something inside had blown them apart. They told me, storms can do that. But Jordan didn't look convinced. Later, when he pulled me aside, his face had a solemn pallor. "There were footprints," he said quietly. "Bare ones. Human. Deep in the snow." My mouth dried, leading. "Where?" He swallowed. "Across the frozen lake. Toward the lodge." "Toward," I echoed. "Not away?" He shook his head. "I moved out of my old apartment after that. I don't stay anywhere without neighbors close enough to hear me if I scream. I keep radios on at night. I sleep lightly. I avoid northern winters entirely. But cold has a way of finding you, even in places where it has no right to." Last December, when temperatures dipped unusually low, I stepped outside to take out the trash, and the wind shifted with a familiar lilt, a stretched-out cadence. A memory sharpened to a point. Liidda. Not gentle. Not distant. Relieved. Calling because I once answered. Calling because winter remembers. I was 32 when I moved into the top unit of 47, Aldercrest Road, and heard Winter knock for the first time. I remember the exact tone of that knock, soft, almost polite, like someone too shy to ask for help. It should have been nothing. People hear things in old houses. But something in that sound touched the part of me that still twitched from my breakup. That fragile place where loneliness echoes. Morro Bay, Washington, felt like a town built out of cold breath. Salt air, gray mornings, the kind of wind that makes your eyes water, even when you're inside. The duplex was old but sturdy, perched on a hill that looked down at the harbor. Mrs. Harrow, the landlord, shuffled across the snowy walkway as she handed me the keys. "Winter's peaceful here," she'd said, adjusting her faded green scarf. "Peaceful as snow." I'd smiled, trying not to look as hollow as I felt. The breakup had gutted me. Days of splitting furniture, nights of splitting memories. I told myself I needed quiet, just a few months away from the city, away from the noise of familiar heartbreak. The duplex felt like a retreat, a pause button, a place where I could rebuild myself quietly, piece by trembling piece. The first evening was uneventful. Caleb helped me carry boxes up the narrow staircase, complaining dramatically every time the steps creaked. "This place has character," he said, grinning as he plopped my suitcase in the living room. "Or ghosts." I rolled my eyes. Don't start. Don't start." "Fine. But when the walls start whispering, remember I offered to help you find a normal apartment?" "They already whisper," I said, tapping one of the old vents. "They're saying, Caleb has no upper body strength." He laughed, gave me a hug that lasted a beat longer than usual, and said his joking goodbye, a goofy little pattern of knuckles on the doorframe. Tap, tap, tap. After he drove off, I made tea, turned on the small space heater, and sat cross-legged on the couch. The storm outside was gathering strength. I smelled damp wood, cold metal, the faint briny scent of the coastline. A familiar loneliness crept into me, but I tried to welcome it. At least, loneliness was honest. The knock came at 9:12 p.m. Tap, tap, tap. My heart lurched. Not because it was loud, it wasn't, but because it matched Caleb's playful goodbye exactly. Same rhythm, same spacing, same softness. I froze, staring at the bedroom window. The wind moaned across the eaves, but no trees were anywhere near that pane. Slowly, I stood and walked toward it. The glass was fogged slightly from the heater's warmth. There was nothing outside, just swirling snow and the faint shape of the neighbor's fence. Maybe it was settling wood or a fragment of ice falling. I told myself this 3 times before I could breathe normally again. The next day, I tried to forget it, put away dishes, set up my little workspace near the window overlooking the bay. But every so often, my eyes drifted toward that bedroom window, waiting for something I couldn't name. On the second night, the knock came again. This time, at the living room window. A different rhythm, tap, 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 and I felt a tightening in my throat because I recognized it. That second pattern wasn't Caleb's. It was the sound the spoon made earlier, when I stirred sugar into my tea. Like something outside had been listening. By the 4th night, it escalated, knocking at the kitchen pane exactly matching the sound of the bathroom door I'd closed that morning. Knocking at the stairwell window, matching the creak Caleb's boot had made on moving day. It wasn't random. It wasn't the wind. It was learning. I mentioned it to Mrs. Harrow when she came by to drop off a second set of keys. "It's probably the cold shrinking the wood," she said briskly, staring at the floor. Then, almost whispering, "Just don't open anything after dark. All right?" Why would I? But she was already backing toward the staircase, muttering something about icy roads. Her tires screeched as she drove off. That night, the wind advisory turned into a blackout. The entire neighborhood went dark. my breath fogged in front of me as I fumbled for a flashlight. The windows glowed faintly with moonlit snow. Then I heard it. A voice. Outside the bedroom window. Soft, trembling, familiar. "Let me in, Nora. It's freezing." For a split second, my mind broke open in grief-addled hope because it sounded like my mother. Same pitch, same weariness. The way she always paused before saying my name. But the silhouette behind the frosted glass was tall. Much taller than her. My throat filled with a slow, rising horror. And then the silhouette leaned closer. "Please," it whispered. "Open up." The window latch twitched. The latch moved again slowly, scraping against the frame. I lunged forward on instinct, slamming my palm over it just as it began to rise. The cold radiating through the glass burned my skin. Something on the other side pressed back with quiet determination. "Stop," I whispered, though I didn't know if I meant stop knocking or stop existing. My breath trembled in front of me, frosting into tiny crystals. Then it came the knock. My knock. Perfectly mimicked. Tap, tap. A rhythm I'd used earlier on the bathroom door. Without thinking, when checking a leak. Something had heard it, stored it, was feeding it back to me through the glass like a child excited to show they'd learned a new word. "Let's switch places." A whisper slid through the cracks. But the voice wasn't my mother's anymore. It was mine. "You come out. I come in." A numbness spread up my arms. Not from the cold, from the realization that the thing outside wasn't trying to break in violently. It wanted permission, a trade, an invitation. I pushed down on the latch with every ounce of strength I had. The thing outside knocked again. My rhythm, my tone, my exact pressure. "Stop it," I choked. "Stop." The knocking ceased. A moment later, something scraped softly along the siding, moving toward the kitchen, then the living room, then the stairwell window. Each spot giving off a faint thud as if something tall was testing their latches too, memorizing them. I grabbed my coat, shoved my feet into boots without tying them, and fled down the staircase. The air outside stabbed my lungs with cold. Snow reached past my ankles, swallowing noise. Halfway down the hill, I slipped and fell, hands sinking into icy powder. Behind me, far up the hill, I heard a familiar sound. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb's knock. The one from the doorframe on moving day. Only now, it echoed from every side of the duplex at once. Bedroom, kitchen, stairwell, like the whole house was knocking at me, begging. I ran. By the time Caleb found me barefoot, coat half-buttoned, shaking uncontrollably, I couldn't form sentences. He wrapped me in a blanket, kept repeating, "Just breathe. Nora, I'm here. I'm right here." But every time he said my name, I flinched because I'd heard it, whispered in my own voice an hour earlier. The officers searched the duplex at sunrise. No footprints around the building except mine fleeing. But every window latch was raised. Even the tiny one above the shower that I had never opened. "Maybe you forgot," one officer suggested gently. But I knew what I'd felt pressing on the other side of that glass. Patient, inhumanly still, imitating my breath, my knocks, my voice. They suggested stress, trauma, isolation, all the usual suspects. Caleb didn't ask questions. He just helped me move out that afternoon. But Winter didn't stay behind. At his apartment, we set up a small futon for me near the window. I tried to laugh at myself, tried to reclaim some logic. But that first night, after Caleb fell asleep on the couch, the heater clicked twice in the silence. Tap, tap. My stomach dropped. I waited, breath locked in my chest. The window glass fogged over, one perfect circle appearing dead center, as if someone with cold lungs stood outside breathing gently against it. I approached slowly, praying it was just my breath carried oddly by the heater. But I wasn't close enough yet. The fogged circle was too high. Much too high. Then, through that faint fog, I heard my own voice whisper softly, "Nora, let me back in." The glass trembled. The heater clicked again. And I felt something, some presence, learning the sound of my life all over again. Waiting for the moment. I'm too tired to resist. I remember that February morning like it was etched into ice. The train to Interlaken rattled through the snow-draped Alps. The kind of scenery that could make anyone forget they had a life outside a postcard. I was 19, alone and desperate. My savings were thin, my parents unreachable, and I had debts I couldn't even name without cringing. Houses sitting for a wealthy travel writer seemed like a miracle. A chance to stay somewhere warm, work a few hours, and sketch landscapes without thinking about my bank account. Bergru appeared suddenly after the last turn in the snowy road. Its glass walls shimmered under frost, reflecting the white silence of the forest around it. It was beautiful in a way that made your stomach tighten, like something alive was watching you. I shook off the feeling and pulled my bag through the narrow driveway. The villa's door clicked open at my knock, no one there. Just instructions on a tablet and a key left on the counter. The first hours were unnerving but manageable. The villa was fully automated. Lights, temperature, cameras, even music could be controlled remotely. I spent the afternoon exploring, walking through its high-ceilinged rooms, tracing my fingers over cold wooden panels, and wondering what it would be like to live somewhere this isolated. The snow outside was perfect, unbroken, and silent. That night, after unpacking, I ate in silence, the wind tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. I tried to call my friend in Paris, but the signal was weak. My tablet buzzed with a message, "Welcome. Stay alert." I laughed nervously, thinking it was the writer's joke. But as the evening grew colder, shadows seemed to stretch across the rooms in ways my mind couldn't explain. I tried to rationalize it, fatigue, isolation, or maybe cabin fever. But when I checked the security feed, a flicker caught my eye in the wine cellar, a room that should have been sealed. I told myself it was nothing, just the camera glitching, but as I lay in the loft staring at the ceiling, I could hear the faintest metallic tapping through the vents. It wasn't just the wind. And that's when I realized I wasn't the only presence in Bergru. The next morning I ventured outside, hoping daylight would banish the fear. I pressed my hands into the snow, looking for tracks near the cellar. But the surface was pristine. The village in the valley below was a distant blur, 6 kilometers away, and I felt a sudden weight of isolation. Back inside, the villa's tablet chimed with motion alerts. My stomach sank as I watched the footage, the cellar door, which had been firmly shut, now slightly ajar. No footprints, no signs of anyone approaching. Just the door moving on its own, or so it seemed. I dialed the writer's number. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound composed. "The cellar. It looks like it's open. Did you check it before I arrived?" There was silence, then a soft voice. "Bergru has its ways. Stay inside during white conditions." The line went dead. I dropped the tablet, my fingers trembling. Hours passed like hours of eternity. I tried to busy myself with sketches, forcing my hands to move over the paper. But at night, the tapping returned, this time synchronized with the tick of an old clock on the wall. I followed the sound, trying to rationalize, until my eyes landed on a tall figure in the feed, beneath the loft staircase, motionless, silent, watching. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I realized then that Bergru wasn't just a house, it was a trap. The automated doors clicked shut without warning, lights blinked off, and the tablet glowed with one final message: "Do not leave. Do not try to leave." Panic flared. My heart hammered as I climbed the loft library, the snow outside calling like a lifeline. I leapt from the balcony into a drift, pain shooting through my ankle. But I kept running into the silent forest. Every step felt like escaping a shadow that could follow me anywhere. I crawled into a grove of trees, gasping, snow melting into my hair. Hours later, the local police found me, curled in the cold, unable to explain the terror fully. At the station, they were polite but skeptical. "No signs of entry," one officer muttered. "Heat signatures in the walls, tool marks in the cellar, but no suspect, nothing else." "Are you sure?" I nodded mutely, replaying every moment in my mind. It made no sense. And yet the memory of that figure beneath the staircase stayed vivid, its presence heavier than any explanation. When I returned home weeks later, life felt distant. I couldn't shake the memory of Bergru. Then the email arrived, A live camera feed, showing the villa's loft library light flicking on in a snowstorm. My stomach sank. Someone or something was still there watching, waiting. I avoided news reports, social media, anything connected to Switzerland. But I couldn't avoid the questions. What had I seen? What had I triggered? And why did Bergru feel alive? As if the house itself were breathing, thinking, waiting. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch. Every noise in the heating vents made me flinch. I found myself researching Bergru obsessively, reading old architectural records, online forums, even local legends. Locals whispered of a previous caretaker who vanished during winter, of automated systems that malfunctioned in patterns that couldn't be explained by technology alone. I called my old art professor, someone I trusted. I think it's alive, I admitted quietly. The villa, it's aware of me, of anyone who enters, and it doesn't let go. He sighed. Fear amplifies perception, Alara, but I trust your instincts. If it feels alive, don't dismiss that. Your first priority is safety always. Despite the advice, my curiosity gnawed at me. I wanted answers. One night I returned to the email feed, studying the light patterns in the loft library. Something shifted in the shadows. A figure moving just out of clear view. I realized then that Bergru was not only observing but communicating, in its own cryptic, mechanical way. I never returned to Bergru. I sold my sketches from that winter, quietly moved to another city, and slowly rebuilt a life away from the Alps. But I carried the fear, the lesson, and the memory with me. Sometimes I dream of the villa, its glass walls gleaming in the snow, the shadows of someone or something watching from the loft. I've learned to trust instincts, to respect isolation, and to know that some places are alive in ways we may never understand. The moral of my story? Fear is not always imagined. Some places, some moments demand caution and respect. Survival depends on listening to that instinct and acting decisively before silence becomes a trap. I've always believed that solitude could be a kind of luxury, until the winter of 2018 taught me otherwise. After my engagement ended, I needed a break from the noise of everyone else's life. So when the opportunity came to house sit for a wealthy couple in Norway, I jumped at it. Their house perched on a cliffside above the Storfjorden near. Ålesund was a modernist dream. All glass and steel, clean lines, and walls that made the fjord and sky impossible to ignore. The owners promised me peace, a place to think, and if I was lucky, a glimpse of the northern lights. What they didn't warn me about was how exposed I'd feel, how the silence of such a house could press in like a physical weight. The first week was uneventful in a deceptive way. I decorated my temporary space with a few blankets, set up my laptop for remote work, and tried to ignore the biting wind that scraped the cliffside relentlessly. But I noticed something peculiar the second morning. Frost streaks on the exterior window at shoulder height were wiped clean, each day in exactly the same place. I chalked it up to condensation patterns, or maybe the strange way heat radiated from the floor vents. Still, a prickling unease lodged itself in my chest. On the third day, I discovered my car wouldn't start. A borrowed Volvo, all winter tires intact, or so I thought, now had 2 tires sliced cleanly through. The nearest service was hours away, and with the phone battery lingering dangerously low and the internet cutting out in intermittent bursts, I realized I was trapped. The wind and snow made the world beyond the house a gray blur. Inside, the silence seemed to thicken. I tried to convince myself it was all just isolation playing tricks on me, until I saw it, a figure across the fjord, standing motionless at the waterline, only visible when the house lights were on, unmoving as if waiting. I blinked, shook my head, and it was still there. That night, the house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The automated lighting system flicked on and off with no input from me. I sat on the couch, willing myself to sleep when a calm, mechanical voice cut the stillness. Occupant detected 1. I wasn't sure if it was a glitch, or if the house knew something I didn't. Morning brought more questions than answers. My nerves were raw, and I began noticing other anomalies. The kitchen island had a tape residue under which lay a small spare key. Fresh fingerprints smudged across it made my heart hammer in disbelief. Someone had been inside. No one had mentioned that possibility. No warnings about previous intrusions. The sense of safety I had clung to dissolved instantly. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the previous house sitter had forgotten something. or the owners had spare staff who visited occasionally, but there was no evidence of anyone else. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing outside except the snow I had tracked in myself. The absence of explanation felt deliberate, like the house was holding a secret just out of reach. That evening, as darkness swallowed the fjord, I noticed movement again. The figure from before was still there, perfectly still but uncomfortably precise. Its posture was human, but the stillness was not. I spoke to it once, calling my own name, and it tilted slightly, like a shadow acknowledging my voice without intent to respond. Fear wrapped around me in tight spirals. I attempted to leave. The Volvo remained inoperable, and my attempts to call for help were futile, even when I considered walking down to the small fishing village a few miles away. The snowstorm made the landscape treacherous, and the figure along the water's edge seemed to follow the light from my windows, a silent sentinel. By nightfall, my anxiety peaked. The house's automated system flicked on the motion sensors, again while I sat frozen in the living room. Occupant detected one, it repeated, as though mocking my confusion. The house had always been marketed as a technological marvel, the pinnacle of Scandinavian design. Now it felt like a trap, a predator camouflaged in steel and glass. I realized I was no longer alone, and the cold, exposed design of the house was no longer modernist beauty. It was a vulnerability. I began barricading myself in the sunroom, sliding doors locked, heavy furniture against the glass. Each creak of the house settled around me, but it wasn't the wood or steel making the noise, it was something else. Footsteps? Breathing? I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Then the sunroom door slowly slid open on its own. Panic surged. I ran upstairs, heart pounding, tripping over rugs I had so carefully arranged. The bedroom door wouldn't hold long, but I shoved a chair against it anyway, retreating into the corner and trying to catch my breath. From below I heard it, breathing, deliberate and patient. Not frantic, not panicked, just existing, waiting. I realized then that this was no ordinary intruder. Someone or something knew exactly how the house functioned. The layout, the sensors, the locks, even the automated voice announcing my presence. Whoever it was, they were inside, hidden in plain sight, orchestrating an entire symphony of terror without ever revealing themselves. I searched desperately for a way out. The second-floor maintenance hatch seemed my only option. I'd never climbed through a roof opening before, but fear made me inventive. The hatch led to the icy roof, and I lowered myself carefully, one trembling hand at a time. Snow met my body in a sharp shock, and I slid down into knee-deep drifts, sprinting toward a distant fishing shed I'd spotted earlier. My lungs burned. My legs shook, but the figure did not follow, not visibly. Inside the shed, I found an old phone left by local fishermen. I called the authorities, reporting everything, my voice shaking in the bitter wind. Even as I spoke, I felt the cliffside house behind me like a ghost watching. The police arrived hours later, and after examining the property, blamed a former associate of the homeowners. The story made headlines locally, a bizarre mix of modern design and psychological terror. Yet even months later, I had questions that remained unanswered. How had no footprints appeared around the house? How had the intruder maneuvered through a fully automated, high-tech residence without triggering more alerts? The logic didn't add up. Returning to the States, I carried with me a heightened sense of vigilance. Glass, I realized, was a double-edged sword. It reflected beauty, openness, and light, but it offered no protection, no barrier against the persistent and unseen. I had always believed that modern design could create safety, that technology could replace instinct. That belief was shattered on a Norwegian cliffside in a house that never blinked. Sleep became a fragile commodity. Shadows in my apartment, unfamiliar noises outside my door. Each moment reminded me of the cold exposure of that house. Even in daylight, I imagined figures standing still, watching, patient and waiting. I began sketching again, a therapeutic act. But the drawings often carried the faint outlines of someone across the fjord, a subtle silhouette in every horizon. Years later, the house was sold and renovated. Locals told stories of the glass reflecting a figure even when unoccupied. I never returned to Ålesund, yet the memory of the cliffside terror remained vivid. The story became a private caution for me, a lesson about isolation, vulnerability, and the assumptions we place on modern safety. Looking back, I realize the moral is simple, yet profound. No matter how secure our surroundings seem, or how advanced the technology we rely on, vigilance and self-reliance are irreplaceable. We can design walls of steel and glass, but they cannot shield us from the unknown, from human cunning or the fear that thrives in the quiet. True safety comes not from distance or modernity, but from awareness, intuition, and respect for the fragility of solitude. Even now, when I see glass reflecting the night sky, I pause, and I remember the house that never blinked. I had never thought moving to an old, European townhouse would feel like stepping into another century, but that's exactly how it was. When I arrived in Ghent in January 2020, snow was relentless, blanketing narrow streets in a thick, muffled silence, the kind that makes even the simplest footsteps sound like drumbeats. I was there to watch over my cousin's antiques during the university winter closure, a favor that seemed harmless enough at the time. My own life felt like a pile of frayed edges. Graduate school had left me drained. Every paper and experiment had chipped away at my sense of certainty. A quiet, isolated house seemed like the perfect refuge. The townhouse was magnificent, built long before modern plumbing and insulation, and it made its age known. Floors creaked under my weight, doors expanded and contracted with the cold, and the wind whispered through unseen gaps. At first, I treated the noises as part of the charm, but by the second night, I noticed something that didn't fit any logical explanation. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing across the tiled hallway each morning just before dawn. They stopped outside my bedroom door and then disappeared. I told myself it was just the old house settling, or perhaps snow-heavy boots from a neighbor, but the unease settled in my chest like ice. By the third day, small signs of intrusion became undeniable. Slush had pooled beneath the coat rack near the entrance, though I hadn't opened the door myself since arriving. Chairs were slightly shifted, cabinets unlocked, and the garden gate that I distinctly remembered locking was now closed from the inside. I felt watched, my nerves stretched thin. Herr Decker, the elderly neighbor, only made it worse. His apartment overlooked the courtyard. Each time I glanced out the window, he was there, silently staring, always watching, even when snowfall made it nearly impossible to see anything. There was something about the way he leaned that made him feel less like a neighbor and more like a sentinel. Still, I tried to maintain my composure. I cataloged the antiques methodically: porcelain figurines, delicate clocks, oil paintings. I reminded myself I was rational, that people didn't just appear in empty hallways or move furniture for sport. But rationality has a weak voice when fear begins whispering louder. One evening, while examining a porcelain figurine, I noticed a tiny lens embedded at its base, a miniature camera. My stomach dropped. I removed the memory card. Hundreds of images and videos showed me in my bedroom at night, sleeping, sometimes even shifting in my sleep, completely unaware. Panic surged. The snowstorm outside raged, cutting off roads, and my phone had lost signal. I couldn't reach anyone, couldn't call for help. The footsteps felt closer, more insistent. I told myself I had to get out, but when I tried the rear exit, I found fresh footprints leading into the cellar, not away, but into the darkness below. I backed away slowly. That night, sleep was impossible. I stayed awake, heart racing, listening for every sound, wondering if the next footstep would be the one I couldn't escape from. By the second week, the snow had turned the streets into walls of white, isolating me further. I kept a strict routine, waking early to check the antiques, ensuring everything remained untouched. But the small disturbances continued. Every morning, the footprints under the coat rack multiplied. Chairs, tables, small trinkets, they were all subtly rearranged. I started carrying a small flashlight wherever I went, even during the day, and I began talking to myself to stay sane. "It's just someone playing tricks," I muttered constantly. But deep down, I knew it wasn't tricks. Someone or something was inside the house. Herr Decker became more unnerving. One morning, I caught him peering through the narrow gap of the hallway window as I unpacked a cabinet. I waved politely, trying to appear normal, but he didn't respond. He just watched, silent as snowfall drifting through the courtyard. That afternoon, I heard voices in my head. Not real voices, but whispers of doubt. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the camera footage was old. Maybe the footprints were from snow melting from my own shoes. My logical mind was desperate for excuses, but evidence doesn't lie. That night, I attempted to secure the doors with extra locks, sliding the heavy deadbolt into place. I lay awake under the thin comforter, listening. There it was again, Footsteps pacing slowly, halting outside my bedroom, and then silence. I crept toward the door with the flashlight, heart hammering, only to find it undisturbed. The slush beneath the coat rack glistened, forming small rivulets toward the wall. My throat tightened. Someone had been there. Determined to confront the problem, I ventured outside to examine the snow, looking for signs of forced entry. Snow was pure and untouched around the house, except for a single trail leading toward the rear gate, ending abruptly at the cellar door. I realized I was trapped. The snow wasn't just a blanket. It was a prison wall. Panic clawed at me, but I forced myself to breathe. I remembered the attic, a small, dusty space above the study, hardly noticeable unless you knew it was there. It would be my refuge if things escalated. The next day, while cataloging the antiques, I carefully inspected every figurine, every cabinet, every corner. That's when I found the camera hidden in porcelain. Its memory card full of videos I hadn't yet watched. I plugged it into my laptop and froze. Night after night, I was recorded sleeping. Some nights, the footage showed movement in the room, objects shifting slightly, shadows passing, and yet Herr Decker had confirmed alibis from neighbors, making it impossible for him to be there. My rational mind wanted an explanation, but all I felt was terror. I realized then that hiding wouldn't be enough. I needed to signal for help, and the only way was through the attic skylight. I dragged a small desk lamp, wedged it near the glass, and turned it on, flicking it in Morse-like patterns. Hours passed, the snowstorm showing no mercy. I watched the light refract against icy crystals, praying someone would notice. In that frozen, isolated night, I felt more alone than ever, knowing that whatever had invaded this house, it wasn't finished. The morning the police arrived felt unreal. They had tracked my emergency signal and navigated the snowdrifts, their boots crunching like distant thunder as they approached the townhouse. I led them inside cautiously, pointing out the small disturbances, rearranged furniture, slush puddles, the tiny camera hidden in the porcelain figurine. Herr Decker was waiting in his apartment when they went to question him. His calm, unnerving smile made my skin crawl. When they investigated the cellar, they found it had been modified, a small crawl space connecting his apartment to the townhouse. It was an architectural anomaly, one that explained how someone could move undetected between the buildings. Herr Decker was arrested, protesting his innocence in quiet, measured tones. I wanted to believe the nightmare was over, but as the officers processed him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. Back inside the townhouse, I combed the attic and bedrooms, convinced I would find some hidden device, some overlooked trace. But the rooms were empty. The snow outside was pristine, the quiet restored. And yet I couldn't shake the sensation that I was still being watched. Every shadow seemed heavier, every creak more deliberate. I refused to sleep in the house that night, instead huddling in a hotel, staring at the window, hoping the isolation had ended. Weeks later, I returned to pack my belongings. The townhouse seemed smaller now, less enchanting, filled with memories of fear rather than charm. As I stepped outside into the fresh snow, I thought I had escaped completely. Then I froze. There behind me, a single footprint had appeared in the untouched snow, a reminder that some watchers are never fully caught. I spun around. No one was there, only the cold wind whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I realized then that fear has a persistence all its own. It doesn't vanish with arrests or explanations. It lingers, hiding in corners, in the soft echo of footsteps, in the silence that follows a storm. And sometimes, even when all evidence points to safety, it leaves you with a subtle, chilling doubt. Are you truly free, or are you just waiting for the next shadow? After the ordeal, I returned to the United States, trying to piece my life back together. I resumed my research, but everything felt smaller, insignificant compared to the months spent under that snowbound roof. My colleagues noticed I was jumpy, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I tried to laugh it off, attributing my nerves to fatigue. But in quiet moments, I remembered the creaks, the slush, and Herr Decker's unreadable gaze. Sleep remained difficult. I double-checked locks, scanned corners before entering rooms, and sometimes even left lights on all night. The idea that someone could slip in undetected, hidden by walls and snow, never left me. I spoke to a therapist, trying to reconcile my feelings of helplessness with rational explanations. Yet the memory of watching the footage, my own private nights, captured by unseen eyes, haunted me. The sense of invasion was more than physical. It had burrowed into my mind, leaving a subtle, persistent anxiety. I began documenting the experience, at first as a personal journal, then as a potential research case on paranoia and fear responses. Writing became a method of processing the trauma, but it also deepened my awareness of human vulnerability. Houses, no matter how secure, are not just structures. They are ecosystems of trust. When that trust is violated, even the strongest rational mind falters. I also kept in touch with local authorities in Ghent, following the investigation. Herr Decker remained in custody, but questions lingered. How had the camera footage shown movement on nights he was confirmed absent? Why had the attic and other rooms revealed no further devices? Some of it remained unexplained. A subtle reminder that the world holds shadows even in the light of reason. The story of that winter in Ghent taught me lessons that extended far beyond fear. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize when rational explanations aren't enough. I understood the fragility of isolation and the importance of seeking help even when the situation seems surreal. And perhaps most importantly, I realized that vigilance, while essential, cannot replace courage. Fear can paralyze, but action, however small, can carve a path toward safety. Years later, when I recall that snow-covered townhouse, I don't just remember the terror. I remember resilience, the way I found solutions when trapped, how I signaled for help, and how I refused to surrender entirely to panic. The footprint in the snow behind me remains a symbol, a quiet warning that life often holds what we cannot control. And yet it is also a testament to human endurance, that even in the face of invasion, isolation, and inexplicable terror, we can find ways to survive, to learn, and ultimately to move forward. The moral is clear. Vigilance and courage must coexist. The world may hold shadows, but our response, thoughtful, deliberate, and brave, defines the boundary between victim and survivor. Fear may linger, but it does not have to define us. I've always had a knack for noticing the small things, the way shadows shift in a room, the subtle smell of someone's presence lingering on a chair, even when they've been gone for hours. That sensitivity, honed by years of moving through crowded hostels and cramped apartments during my childhood in New York, is why I said yes when Professor Bianchi asked me to stay behind in his boarding house in Bologna over winter break. It's just a week, Julia. Keep the place warm, water the plants, and don't worry about a thing, he said. I didn't know then how much the building would worry me. It was mid-February 2017, and a rare cold wave had gripped the outskirts of the city. Snow had piled high in the streets, and the wind cut through the narrow alleys like glass. The boarding house, a red brick relic with creaking floorboards and rattling shutters, felt unusually alive. Radiators clicked in quiet patterns, floors hummed under invisible weight, and drafts carried the scent of old wood and dust. I moved in cautiously, dragging my luggage across the worn hallway, trying to convince myself it was just an old building being temperamental. The first night I noticed things disappearing, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, just bread from the kitchen, a bottle of water, tiny amounts that wouldn't set off alarm bells but made me pause. Muddy footprints appeared near the kitchen even though the snow outside never reached that level. I shrugged it off as my imagination. Old houses always made me nervous, but I began checking doors and windows obsessively. Nothing was open. Nothing was broken. And yet the feeling of being watched persisted. Then the top-level heating failed. The upper floors grew bitterly cold, and I wrapped myself in scarves and sweaters, hoping the chill would pass. But the attic above remained uncomfortably warm. At first, I told myself it was just the sun catching the roof. But then came the soft thuds, almost rhythmic at odd hours. I would freeze, straining to hear over the creaks of the old house. And then there were the whispers, fleeting, too faint to understand, always stopping the moment I held my breath. I couldn't sleep. I wandered the floors at night, tracing the sounds, staring at walls and corners as if the house itself would confess its secrets to me. That's when I first noticed the false panel behind the kitchen. I pressed my hand to it and the wood shifted under my fingers. A thin gap opening into shadow. My stomach turned. Whatever was behind there had been living without anyone noticing. I had no idea at that point how right I was or how dangerous. I spent the next morning convincing myself I'd imagined it all. Maybe I was too tired, too cold, too isolated. But the evidence grew impossible to ignore. Behind that false panel was a narrow crawl space leading to an attic I'd never known existed. It smelled of damp wood, smoke, and a faint trace of unwashed clothes. Blankets were folded neatly. Candles sat in clusters and on the walls. Scratched dates formed a crude timeline. People had been staying there long term, unnoticed. I froze when I heard a soft shuffle behind me. "Who's there?" I whispered. The voice that answered was hoarse, quiet, almost pleading. "Please don't call the police. It's just me." A man emerged from the shadows, thin, gaunt, eyes hollowed by hunger and fear. "I'm Luca," he said, his voice trembling. It's so cold. Shelters are full. I have nowhere else to go." My fear battled my empathy. Every horror story I'd ever read about break-ins flashed through my mind. But I also knew what it was like to have nowhere safe. "Why didn't you just, I don't know, find somewhere else?" I asked cautiously. He shrugged, as if the gesture explained everything. "There's nothing. Not tonight. Please, let me stay. I won't cause trouble." I hesitated. I could call the authorities, but Winter was brutal. And he didn't seem violent, just desperate. After a long silence, I nodded slowly. "All right, just for tonight. But tomorrow you have to leave." Luca's relief was immediate. He smiled faintly, and I felt the first twinge of warmth. Real warmth that wasn't from the radiators. That night we shared a meal I had prepared for myself. Sitting on the attic floor with candles flickering, both of us too aware of the cold world outside. But something gnawed at me. There were heavier footsteps above us, ones Luca hadn't made. My heart thudded against my ribs as I realized the attic might not just hold him. Whoever else was up there, they weren't expecting me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house was amplified. The wind rattling the windows, the groaning beams above, the soft but steady breathing of Luca next to me. I felt trapped in a delicate balance. One wrong move and everything could collapse. By dawn, the heavier footsteps had stopped, but my unease remained. I needed to make sense of what was happening, so I ventured down to the kitchen. The snow outside was still falling, covering my footprints and making the world feel more isolated. As I examined the floor near the coal chute, I noticed scuff marks. They were old, but recent enough to be suspicious. Whoever was using the attic had a second way in, undetected by anyone, a hidden passage from the outside. I confronted Luca quietly. "Is someone else here? Another person?" He avoided my eyes, maybe, but I don't know. "I haven't seen anyone for days. Please don't make a fuss. If they find out we've been noticed, it could get ugly." The thought of confrontation made my stomach twist. He was right, there was no way to guarantee my safety. And there was no shelter in this snowbound outskirts. I left him there, promising to get some firewood and breakfast, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes. Later, I found myself back at the attic crawlspace, flashlight in hand. The walls were scratched with dates and names, and I realized that this had been a rotating refuge. People had been slipping in and out through the coal chute, surviving the harsh winters unnoticed. It was a ghost network of humanity, invisible to society, relying on chance and shadows to endure. It hit me how fragile our assumptions about safety were. The world outside was cold and unwelcoming. And inside the house, my fear had blinded me to the basic instinct of survival. The attic warmth wasn't sinister. It was life. Small and tenacious, hiding from a world too busy to care. By evening, the building had grown quieter. Luca was sleeping fitfully, curled under blankets that smelled faintly of smoke and mildew. I was restless. I wanted to leave, but the thought of abandoning him in the freezing streets made me feel like I was failing my own moral compass. Then the heavier footsteps returned. They were deliberate, slow, and unmistakably human. My pulse raced. I grabbed a flashlight and whispered Luca awake. "Someone else." "Upstairs," I said, barely audible. He nodded, fear etched across his face. "Hide, don't let them see you." I crawled into a corner, heart hammering, listening as the floorboards above creaked under the weight of whoever it was. The sound of multiple boots confirmed my worst fears. Luca wasn't alone, and neither was I. Something primal stirred in me, a blend of terror and survival instinct. I bolted toward the rear stairwell, urging Luca to follow. "Now run!" Snow fell around us as we stumbled down the narrow steps, doors slamming behind us. My lungs burned from cold and panic. The street was empty, silent except for the crunch of our boots. Behind us, the boarding house stood like a dark sentinel, hiding its secret. I glanced back once, heart lurching, and saw a faint light flicker in the attic window, as if the house itself was breathing. Authorities later arrived after my call, By then, the attic revealed its history. Multiple people had been using it as a temporary refuge, coming and going through the coal chute, leaving behind only whispers and scratches. Luca was gone, melted back into the shadows, just one of many who had survived on the margins of society. In the weeks that followed, I tried to process what had happened. The boarding house was scheduled for renovation, which meant the hidden attic would eventually vanish, buried under new walls and insulation. But something lingered in me. The knowledge of those unseen lives, of people finding warmth and shelter in spaces society forgot. I realized that fear is a lens, not always truth. I had been terrified of a stranger, only to discover survival in its rawest form. The attic warmth, once terrifying, was a symbol of life persisting quietly and visibly. Luca and the others had survived not by breaking the law, but by adapting, by seeking warmth where it existed. I learned that compassion often requires courage, sometimes more than fear does. It's not always easy to do the right thing, especially when the world around you seems indifferent or dangerous. But even small choices, allowing someone to stay safe, offering understanding rather than judgment, can ripple outward in ways we never see. On winter nights in Bologna, people still whisper about the attic light flickering, warming an empty space meant for no one. I like to think it's a reminder that even in our coldest, loneliest moments, warmth and life can persist in the shadows, and that sometimes, noticing the small things like I always do makes all the difference. Moral lesson: compassion and empathy can coexist with fear. True courage lies in recognizing the humanity in others, even when circumstances are uncertain or frightening. The first time I saw the estate perched above Lake Bled, I thought it looked like a dream sculpted from glass and concrete, an impossible modernist jewel amid the snow-blanketed Slovenian landscape. I had agreed to house it for 2 botanists, strangers really, who insisted I remain inside after dark. I'm not someone who scares easily. Years working as a veterinary assistant had taught me to trust instincts over logic, to read subtleties in creatures most people ignore. But that instinctual trust, honed for healing animals, was about to be tested in ways I could never have anticipated. When I arrived in late January, the lake was half frozen, sheets of snow drifting down like ash from a silent sky. My companions, Karelian bear dogs, Torek and Laska, bounded off the car with all the bravado their breed carried, yet froze mere steps from the deck, their hackles rising as though they sensed some invisible barrier. I laughed it off at first, brushing snow from my coat, telling myself that maybe the ice was just too thin, but deep down a chill settled beyond the bite of winter. The first oddity appeared the morning after my arrival. Wet handprints on the sauna glass. Uneven, small, ephemeral. By noon they vanished as if erased by some unseen hand. I called it condensation, a trick of the weather, though part of me refused to lie to myself. My nights were quiet but uneasy. I would watch the dogs curl up near the fireplace, ears pricked toward the lake, growling at nothing. At first I thought they were just on edge from the snowstorm's isolation, but every instinct in my body tightened like a drawn wire, warning me that the estate had its own rhythm, separate from reason. I wandered the house, examining each botanical specimen the owners had left behind. Most were harmless curiosities, but one drawer, locked and hidden in the back of the study, contained a charcoal drawing I could not explain. It depicted a girl standing on the frozen lake, ice visibly thin beneath her feet. The edges of the sketch were smudged, as though the artist had drawn in a tremor of fear. My stomach knotted. Even now, recalling the sight, I can feel the cold tension gripping my chest, the silent warning that I had been invited to a house where reality and something else coexisted uncomfortably. By the third night, Torek and Laska's agitation had grown. Their low growls began at sunset, rising toward the dock where no human presence ever appeared. I checked the lake myself, flashlight slicing the dark. The ice was uneven, forming inward toward the house in places, as if something beneath was breathing warmth, keeping the lake alive even in its frozen prison. I laughed nervously, whispering reassurances to myself, but the sound felt hollow. Something was waiting, something beneath the ice. I had always believed that fear was a luxury, a warning signal from the body when logic fails. But as the snowstorm intensified, I realized fear was more than instinct, it was survival. The bridge connecting the estate to the main road iced over entirely overnight. My phone had no signal and the nearest neighbor lived miles away. I was trapped, The isolation, once a canvas for reflection, became a pressure cooker for anxiety. Each morning I examined the sauna glass. Wet handprints returned, always in different configurations, never larger than a child's hand. Torek refused to approach, standing rigid, ears forward, growling at nothing. Laska mirrored his behavior, a perfect echo of fear and caution. Animals sense things we cannot. I knew this. The dogs were warning me, but warning me of what? On the fourth night I heard it. Bare footsteps across the snow-covered deck. Slow, deliberate. Stopping just outside the glass wall of the living room where my reflection stared back at me. The sound was almost polite, like someone testing the water before entering. My heart thudded violently in my chest, but my training in handling animals and emergencies kicked in. I released Torek and Laska, their barking shattering the night. I followed their frantic momentum to the deck, my boots crunching against snow that had begun to feel like treacle underfoot. The dogs charged into the darkness, their voices vanishing abruptly. I called, but only silence answered. Minutes later they returned, soaked, shaking, their eyes wide with terror. They refused to look at the lake again. That's when I realized whatever was beneath the ice, it had brushed against them. Not physically, something else. Something that did not belong in the realm of logic. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was a prank, a trick of wind and ice. Yet the charcoal drawing, the handprints, the dog's refusal to approach the lake, they all converged into a pattern my mind could not rationalize away. The warmth beneath the ice, the irregular formations along the shoreline, the sensation of being watched. This was real, visceral. My instincts screamed at me, but my reasoned mind demanded proof. By dawn, I had packed a small bag. Torek and Laska refused to move near the lake, so I had to coax them. The forest trail behind the estate promised escape. Though it meant crossing the thinning ice, I paused at the edge of the lake, the water breathing beneath frozen sheets, as if the earth itself was alive. Every instinct shouted to run, to leave before curiosity became foolishness. The ice cracked beneath my weight, thin and treacherous, yet I pressed forward. Torek led, Laska behind, and I followed, boots sliding against the precarious surface. Each step resonated, tiny splashes echoing in the silent, snow-drenched morning. I kept my eyes on the distant tree line, telling myself this was logical. Survival demanded motion, not hesitation. As I moved, I replayed the past days. The handprints, the drawing, the dog's terrified behavior. I remembered sitting alone in the study, looking at the snow falling like ash, feeling the estate's glass walls reflect not just me, but the shadows that had crossed the deck at night. I realized that fear, when ignored, grows into something more substantial than any rational explanation can contain. It becomes truth, not metaphor. The ice shivered beneath me, and I felt it, not the cold, but the subtle pulse, the warmth from below. I did not look back, though I knew the sensation followed. My breath came in sharp bursts, the snow around my boots soaking in silence. And then, faintly, a ripple across the lake, moving against the current of ice formation. I couldn't see, but I knew. The lake had not frozen first. Something was beneath, waiting. Something that had existed long before the estate. Before me, before any human could name it. By midday, I reached the forest trail. The snow muffled our footsteps, the dogs trembling but obedient, and I allowed myself a small relief. Yet in the pit of my stomach, a warning remained. Running might save me physically, but it would never erase the memory. That estate, that lake, had etched itself into my consciousness, a place where instinct and fear were more accurate than logic. I eventually reached a road, a rare snowplow having cleared a thin path. I flagged down a passing vehicle and recounted the story, trying to articulate the unexplainable. No one laughed outright, but the thin smiles and raised eyebrows told me I had sounded mad. I returned later under the sunlight to where the estate had been. The bridge, the lake's edge, all ordinary now. No handprints, no drawing, no signs of intrusion. Even Torek and Laska seemed to shrug off the terror, as though the lake had never whispered beneath its frozen surface. The botanists returned weeks later. They quietly sold the property, leaving the rumors to drift in the village like fog over winter fields. Locals spoke in hushed tones of the lake that froze last, of ice that held secrets beneath its surface. I didn't share the full story. Some truths are too heavy to carry in casual conversation, but I remembered every detail, every instinct, every tiny heartbeat of fear that had guided me through those nights. Years later, I still think about that, Winter at Lake Bled, I often wonder if the lake itself remembers me, if it still waits under ice for someone foolish enough to ignore the warning. My life moved on, patients to care for, clinics to manage, but the lessons remained. Fear, when dismissed as irrational, can manifest in ways impossible to predict. But more importantly, instinct honed through care, attention, and empathy can guide you more reliably than reason alone. The moral is simple: respect what you cannot see and trust what you feel. Logic will protect you in ordinary circumstances, but the world, nature, life, even the unseen beneath a frozen lake, demands a humility of attention. Torek and Laska had known it from the start. I learned it the hard way. Some places, some moments, carry warnings in forms subtle as a paw print or a ripple of ice. Ignore them at your peril. I first heard about the Black Forest from a magazine feature, one of those travel spreads that romanticized isolation and ancient trees. After the scandal that ruined my career, I was desperate for obscurity. My name, Levi Brooks, had once carried weight in the photography world, but one misfired story and a series of thoughtless tweets later, I was persona non grata. Retreating to Germany, I rented a timber-framed cottage far from any road, far from anyone who knew my name. Snow had begun falling the day I arrived, soft at first, then relentless. The cottage was more than I'd expected: heavy oak beams, walls lined with faded tapestries, and a hearth that looked as if it had been feeding families for centuries. I unpacked my camera gear and notebooks, planning to document winter's silence, to capture the kind of intimate, raw imagery I hadn't been allowed to pursue back home. The first night, the forest around me was a white void, only the faint sound of wind through pine needles. I felt a thrill that mingled with unease. There was no one here, or so I thought. By the third morning, I noticed something peculiar. The snow on the narrow forest paths had been cleared, trampled in neat lines despite fresh snowfall overnight. I rationalized it: wildlife maybe, or the wind. But when I went to photograph the scene, the paths were unmistakably walked. Human footprints, precise and deliberate. I shook it off and returned to the warmth of the cottage. Late that night, just as I was reviewing photographs, there was a soft knock at the door. My heart jumped, though I convinced myself it must be a local, perhaps drunk, wandering the woods. When I opened it, no one was there. Then I heard it, a calm, clear voice. "You should leave before the others arrive." I froze, staring into the blackness beyond the threshold. The voice didn't yell, didn't threaten. It was almost polite. I muttered a joke about the forest ghosts and slammed the door, laughing to myself in disbelief. But the next morning, footprints led right to the door, stopping as if waiting for me to notice them. I began noticing other oddities: bowls of food on the counter I hadn't prepared, boots by the hearth that were muddy but clearly not mine. I told myself I was imagining things. Fatigue can do that, right? Yet by evening I could no longer ignore it. Something or someone was here, and I was not as alone as I thought. The following night was worse. Shadows seemed to creep along the walls, and the voice returned, coming from the living room, then the hallway, then the kitchen. Always calm, always distant, always repeating the same warning. My attempts to confront it only amplified the fear that had begun gnawing at the edges of my mind. I armed myself with a heavy lamp and a kitchen knife, pacing the rooms, calling out, "Who's there? Show yourself!" My voice cracked on the last word. For a long, tense moment, silence. Then, slowly, a man stepped from the shadows into the living room. He was tall, gaunt, and dressed in workman's, clothes so worn that I could tell they had been used for decades. He didn't move aggressively, didn't raise his hands. He simply said, "You need to leave before the others arrive." "Others? Who?" I demanded, but the man only shook his head. "The house? It is only borrowed for the winter. Staying too long causes conflicts. You've broken rules unknowingly. It is dangerous to remain." I stared at him, heart hammering. This was no drunk local, no prankster. And yet there was no malice in his eyes, only urgency. Before I could ask more, I noticed lights appearing in the trees outside. Lanterns flickering softly at first, then multiplying slowly, their numbers growing until I could no longer count them. My chest tightened. Something about the way they moved, it was deliberate, almost ceremonial. My mind screamed to run, but I wanted answers. I asked the man again, and he only shook his head, retreating into the shadows. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening to the snow crunch outside. Every sound, a branch breaking, the whisper of wind, set my nerves on edge. By dawn, the path had been cleared again, as if inviting me to leave. By then, I no longer hesitated. I packed a small bag and waited for nightfall. It was nearing midnight when I made my escape. I knew the main doors would be watched, or at least I felt they were, so I headed for the root cellar. The trapdoor creaked, a sound that felt monumental in the silence of the snowy night. I slipped inside, my breath clouding in the icy air, and crawled through the narrow, damp space, emerging into the undergrowth behind the cottage. The forest was a frozen maze, but instinct took over. I followed no trail, only the sound of my own breath and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Occasionally, lantern lights flickered behind the trees, always maintaining distance, almost as if guiding me, but threatening if I faltered. I dared not look back for long. My heart thumped as adrenaline pushed me forward. Hours seemed to pass before I found a snow-covered logging road and eventually a distant inn where the lights and warmth reminded me of human life. I collapsed, exhausted, my mind racing. When I reported the events to the local authorities, they were polite but skeptical. Footprints had been found overlapping around the cottage, some impossibly small, others impossibly large, but no signs of forced entry, no theft. Everything I had feared seemed corroborated by reality, yet they could offer no explanation. In the aftermath, I tried to rationalize what happened. Locals, when pressed, gave cryptic warnings. Some houses are only empty until the gathering begins. They spoke in hushed tones about winter guests, rituals, and the Black Forest's ancient rules. I never received a direct answer. The cottage, as it turned out, had been abandoned for decades, never officially rented that winter. Everything I experienced existed outside the logic I had relied on my whole life. I returned to photography eventually, but I never sought attention again. Fame, scandal, career, they seemed trivial compared to what I had narrowly escaped. I learned to value discretion, patience, and the knowledge that some rules exist beyond human understanding, beyond contracts or laws. Nature, and perhaps something older, had its own boundaries. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left. Would I have been incorporated into the gathering? Lost in a forest that no map fully defines? I try not to dwell on it. The memory is sharp, a permanent cautionary whisper. Years later, I returned to the United States, but the memory never faded. Winter became a season of vigilance, of quiet awareness, a reminder that curiosity has its limits. My friends noticed my unease around snowstorms, but I never explained the reason. Some experiences are not meant for storytelling. They are meant for survival, and for grounding oneself in humility. The moral, I've come to understand, is simple yet profound. Some doors are closed for reasons beyond comprehension, and respect for boundaries, visible or unseen, is as vital as courage. Impatience or arrogance can lead to consequences one is not prepared to face. The forest taught me that lesson, and I carry it like a compass. I tell this story now not to scare, but to remind curiosity is powerful, but wisdom often lies in knowing when to walk away. The forest may seem empty, the paths clear, but the world has rules older than memory, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and others is to heed the warning and leave before the others arrive. I've always heard more than most people. Sounds that others dismiss as background noise, I notice. The creak of a floorboard, the faint hum of a refrigerator, the way footsteps echo differently depending on the carpet. As a professional sound engineer, my ears were my instruments, my sanctuary. But when I arrived at my brother's house in Helsinki that February, I realized my gift could be a curse. He had designed the house himself, an architectural experiment in sound. Hidden microphones, sound-dampening walls, resonant chambers, everything engineered for perfect acoustics. From the moment I stepped inside, the house felt alive, like it was listening. I tried to shrug it off as pride in his work, but the way even the smallest sound lingered unnaturally set my nerves on edge. The first night I heard it, not a door creak or a gust of wind, but a soft, steady breathing beneath the hum of the heating system. At first I thought I imagined it, chalking it up to the house's unique acoustics. I turned off the radiators, unplugged electronics, and still there it was, a slow, deliberate rhythm, perfectly timed with my own breaths. I set up my portable recorder in the living room, reasoning that if nothing else, I could document the oddities. Hours later I listened back. The breathing was there, separate from any mechanical noise, almost conscious. By the third night, the disturbances escalated. The rotary phone in the hallway rang despite being unplugged. I answered, expecting silence or static. Instead, A voice whispered phrases I had spoken earlier that day. Mundane things. Thoughts I hadn't even spoken aloud yet. "I'll just make some tea. It's so cold tonight." My own words repeated back to me in a hushed, intimate tone that set my skin crawling. I tried to convince myself it was stress. Cabin fever brought on by the endless snow outside. But when I checked my recording equipment, I found new files time-stamped while I slept. The audio captured my footsteps moving through rooms I never entered. I felt my pulse spike, a cold dread settling into my chest. The house wasn't just listening, it was following. I tried calling my brother. No answer, abroad, unreachable. It was just me, the snow, and the house that seemed to respond to my every movement, my every thought. I started keeping a journal, documenting sounds, writing down whispers, trying to make sense of it. But every time I paused, the whispers anticipated my next entry, finishing my sentences before I could. That was when I understood the house wasn't passive. It was intelligent. I began to inspect the walls, searching for hidden speakers, wires, anything that could explain the phenomenon rationally. One afternoon, removing a panel in the study, I found a maze of intercom wiring buried behind the drywall. It was old, decades old, and clearly part of some long-forgotten surveillance experiment. My stomach churned. Someone had built this house not just for sound quality, but to eavesdrop. But why now? The network should have been dormant. I realized with horror that the house had a kind of memory. It recorded, stored, and somehow replayed or anticipated. The very act of my breathing, my footfalls, even my fleeting thoughts, seemed to trigger it. The house responded in real time, almost conversationally. Fear, once theoretical, became palpable. I started barricading doors, checking windows. But the house didn't just listen, it controlled. The doors locked automatically whenever I raised my voice in panic or slammed my hands against the walls. Even whispering loudly was too risky. I was trapped by the architecture itself. Sleep became impossible. I lay awake, listening to the faint echoes of my own movements, hearing whispers that anticipated every fear and doubt. "You can't leave. They'll hear," the voice murmured, mirroring my own internal panic. I realized the house was feeding on my anxiety, thriving on the way I reacted. I attempted to record everything, hoping evidence would help me reason through it. Every audio file told the same story. My own life mirrored back with subtle twists. Footsteps appeared in rooms I hadn't entered. Whispers repeated my own thoughts. The more I resisted, the more assertive the house became. By the 5th day, I stopped speaking aloud. I tried moving silently, controlling every breath, every motion. The house paused, hesitated, as if confused by the absence of its usual input. That hesitation gave me the idea I needed. There was a maintenance hatch in the basement, rarely used, leading to the snowy yard. If I could time it, if I could stay silent long enough, I might escape. The next night I waited, breath shallow, body tense. The house seemed to lean in, listening, waiting. I counted heartbeats in my head, feeling like every second could betray me. Then slowly I crept toward the hatch, the snow falling outside thick and relentless. One step, then another. The house made no sound, no resistance, like it was uncertain. And then I was outside, barefoot, snow clinging to my legs, running until the neighbor's lights appeared through the storm. The neighbor's door opened, a warm face peeking out. "Eva, what's wrong?" she asked, alarm in her voice. I could barely speak, shivering, snow plastered to my hair, words failing me. Finally, I managed that the house. "It's listening. It almost..." I couldn't finish. Police arrived later. They searched the house, checked the wires, the recordings, the phone. But there was no intruder, no evidence of tampering. "Probably feedback loops," one officer said, brushing it off. "Electrical interference. Old wiring." "You were under stress," I nodded, but I knew. I had lived it. My recordings, my footsteps, the whispers, they were real. My brother returned a week later. Seeing the chaos, he was horrified. "I never intended this," he said quietly, almost ashamed. "I built the house for acoustics, for experiments in sound. I didn't think it could do this." He had never imagined that his obsessive wiring could lead to a house that monitored, predicted, even manipulated a person. I stayed away after that. The house was sold sealed, but rumors lingered. Neighbors reported hearing muffled conversations drifting from it during storms, even when the house was empty. People dismissed it as imagination or wind. I knew better. That house remembered, that house listened, and in its silence it waited. Even months later, I struggled to sleep. The experience had left marks deeper than frostbite on skin. Every quiet room, every house with hidden spaces, felt alive in a way I couldn't ignore. I questioned my own senses, doubted my sanity, but recordings were proof. My ears had not deceived me. Therapy helped, but it couldn't erase the memory of a building that anticipated my thoughts, that seemed aware of my presence. I developed coping habits, always checking rooms twice, always listening for the subtle hums and breaths in walls. Ordinary houses no longer felt safe. Sound, my gift, became a shadow of terror as much as a skill. I told my story to a few close colleagues in the sound engineering world. Some laughed nervously, others grew silent. Architectural acoustics can be extreme, one said. But you describe something more. Something sentient. I nodded. That was exactly it. A sentient building. I avoided adding my own theories aloud, too afraid of how reality and fear blurred. Winter came again, and though I was far from Helsinki, I remembered the snow and the way the house seemed to breathe along with me. I realized the experience had left a moral imprint. Technology, even sound, even design, is powerful. And power left unchecked can observe, manipulate, and trap. The lesson I carry is simple but hard-earned. Boundaries matter. Not just in architecture or engineering, but in life. Observation without consent, knowledge without restraint. It can become a cage. I had been trapped not by walls, but by someone's ambition and my own trust in reason. Now I live cautiously but aware. I listen, yes, but I do not let what I hear control me. I carry the memory of a house that was alive, that knew me better than I knew myself. And I carry the reminder that every design, every creation, even the smallest recording device, holds the potential to imprison if wielded without care. The house remains empty, yet neighbors swear they hear whispers on cold nights. Sometimes I imagine it listening still, waiting for the next person who underestimates the quiet power of sound. Moral lesson: respect the tools we create, and never underestimate the unseen consequences of observation. Boundaries and awareness are as vital as knowledge itself. I had never really believed in ghosts. Growing up in the cramped, peeling corridors of communal housing in St. Petersburg, I had seen enough of human misery to think that most fear was manufactured by boredom, hunger, or loneliness. Yet when I first arrived at Professor Lebedev's dacha near Vyborg that January, something about the house unsettled me. Not the icicles hanging from the roof, not the thin panes rattling in the wind, but the quiet, almost stubborn life of the house itself. The dacha was falling apart. Boards warped from decades of neglect, wallpaper peeling in yellowed strips, and the basement, where the old stove stood, smelled of damp and coal dust in a way that suggested both history and abandonment. I was there on a practical mission, to guard my professor's research notes and manuscripts while he traveled for winter conferences. Exams loomed, and staying put seemed easier than juggling trains and deadlines. My parents had taught me to endure discomfort without complaint, so the freezing rooms and drafty hallways felt almost nostalgic. I unpacked my bag, leaving behind the city's hum, the convenience of heated apartments, and the warmth of running water. The first sign that something was off didn't come from fear. It came from the mundane. A hammer I had set down on a shelf in the basement had moved, placed closer to the stove than I remembered. I laughed it off, blaming fatigue or my own forgetfulness. But the small displacements continued. Screwdrivers, rags, even my backpack slightly nudged from one corner to another. It was peculiar, certainly, but still explainable. What came next was less so. One night, as I scribbled notes for an exam, the smell of smoke drifted upward. I knew the fire had burned out hours before, and the ash in the stove was cold. Yet each morning I found more ash on the floor around it, fine gray particles as if someone had been stirring the embers while I slept. I began to feel watched, but by what I didn't yet know. There were no sounds beyond the wind, yet the sensation clung like frost to the bones of the house. Then for the first time there was sound. Low, controlled coughing, faint but steady, coming from beneath my feet. I froze on the rickety floorboards. It was not a cough of sickness. It was deliberate, like a whisper through the cracks of the world. I pressed my ear to the boards, half expecting the sound to vanish, but it persisted. Something or someone was down there, moving, living in the shadows of the basement. My rational mind rebelled against the idea, but a small part of me, the part trained to survive the cold, told me pay attention. The basement was about to become more than a room for tools. The next day, armed with a flashlight and a thin metal rod I found in the shed, I ventured down into the basement. The room smelled of coal, wet blankets, and something faintly metallic like old blood. I noticed footprints in the dust circling the stove, patterns too deliberate to be random. Each step had sunk slightly into the cold ash, as though someone had circled the fire for warmth and then vanished into the shadows. My heart beat faster. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice echoed and bounced off the stone walls. Yet the only response was the faint scuffling of movement deeper in the cellar. I shone the flashlight toward the dark corners. There was nothing. No shadow, no figure, just the blankets, some scraps of food, and the lingering heat of a fire that had no visible keeper. That night I tried to sleep upstairs, but the coughing returned, now closer, almost beneath my bed. I lay awake hearing the careful, measured breaths of whoever or whatever was inhabiting my basement. Panic began to weave through me, but I told myself to remain calm. I had survived the harsh winters of St. Petersburg without heat. Surely I could endure a frightened night in an old dacha. By the third day, the snow outside became a silent enemy. A storm had closed the narrow road, and the only exit collapsed under the weight of ice and frost. I was trapped. Supplies dwindled. The realization made the quiet sounds of the basement no longer just mysterious, they were threatening. I considered leaving the house through the chimney or even the small coal chute, but the idea of braving the knee-deep snow with frostbite waiting at every step made me hesitate. I spoke aloud to the shadows, a habit I had picked up from childhood, hoping it might humanize my fears. "I won't hurt you. I just need to stay alive." There was no response, only the subtle shift of air and more footprints circling the stove, as if acknowledging my words. I realized then that I had not stumbled into a haunting, but into a survival story already in progress. Someone, or something, had claimed this basement long before I arrived, and I had unknowingly crossed the line into their territory. The fourth night brought the first direct confrontation. I descended into the basement with a thin resolve and a flickering flashlight. Near the stove, huddled against the wall, was a man, naked, frostbitten, shivering violently, his eyes wide and hollow locked onto mine. "Heat," he rasped. "Only heat." There was no malice in his voice, only desperation. I froze. My first instinct was self-preservation, but the humanity of the man hit me harder than the cold. I had grown up sharing the tiniest scraps with neighbors who were barely alive. I knew the weight of winter hunger and frostbite. I reached out with a blanket, wrapping it around him. He shivered violently, coughing, murmuring his thanks in broken syllables. Yet there was more. Footsteps echoed from deeper tunnels under the house, faint but unmistakable. More movement, more shadows. The sound of another life, another body, perhaps more frostbitten and desperate than the one before me. My mind raced. Should I stay? Could I survive what might come from the unseen below? Panic surged, but instinct took over. I grabbed a lantern, lifted the man, and ran toward the collapsed exit. Snow bit at my face and hands. My palms tore against the ice and rough boards, but I dragged him through knee-deep drifts. Each step was agony, but each heartbeat reminded me why survival was sometimes a shared effort, not a solitary pursuit. I emerged into the harsh white landscape, exhausted, bleeding, and relieved. I had glimpsed the raw edge of human endurance and lived to tell it. The authorities arrived hours later. When my limbs were numb and my voice hoarse from shouting, they found the man I had rescued and, astonishingly, declared him the only survivor of the basement. Multiple footprints were cataloged, leading them to suspect that the tunnels beneath the house had been occupied. But their official report ignored the deeper truth. Something else had lived down there, perhaps waiting, perhaps observing. The villagers spoke of the dacha in hushed tones. Smoke would curl from its chimney on the coldest nights, though no one lived there. My professors and colleagues avoided the topic, attributing my story to overworked imagination. But I had seen what I had seen. The desperation of a human being pushed to the edge, the invisible weight of lives subsisting in the cracks of the world. I returned to St. Petersburg, changed. Exams passed, life resumed its normal rhythm, yet I carried a quiet understanding of survival that could not be shaken. The basement had taught me that fear and compassion often coexist, and that sometimes helping another person is the only way to preserve your own humanity. Years later, I still think about that dacha, the snow, the frostbite, the endless circling of footprints around the stove. I think about Yuri, though that was not his real name, and the unseen others who might have shared the basement with him. The world is filled with hidden lives that scrape existence from shadows and refuse to vanish quietly. The moral of the story is simple. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. Compassion is not a luxury, but a necessity. In the harshest winters, in the coldest corners of life, humanity survives not in isolation but in connection. I had thought my upbringing had prepared me for discomfort, but the basement taught me something deeper. Survival is not merely enduring the cold, it is choosing warmth for others, even when fear claws at your own chest. Some nights, when the wind howls through St. Petersburg, I swear I hear faint coughing beneath my own feet. And I smile, remembering that winter in Viborg, where fear, desperation, and human kindness collided, and I emerged forever changed. I have always preferred solitude, a quiet life tethered to screens and codes, rather than the hustle of human interaction. In February 2019, my world narrowed to the glow of my monitors and the pale light of the Reykjavik winter, where the sun barely dared to show its face. I had been working remotely for years, often clocking 16-hour days in my small suburban home. Friends were few, family distant, and neighbors even more so. My life had a rhythm, predictable, ordered, and safe, or so I thought. That year, a brutal snowstorm descended upon the city with a ferocity that made the air itself heavy. Blizzard warnings covered every channel, yet I felt no particular need to leave. I thrived in isolation, or at least I told myself I did. The streets vanished under layers of snow, and the world outside seemed as though it were a dream slipping further from reach. The first anomaly came subtly. One evening, while reviewing lines of code, I noticed the interior lights flicker. At first I blamed the storm, the uneven power supply that occasionally hit the house during extreme weather. But then I noticed a pattern. The flickers synchronized with the garage door's movements, even though the door was closed. I shook it off, muttering to myself about electrical surges and faulty wiring. Yet a shiver ran down my spine, one that was not entirely due to the chill outside. Later, I grabbed my snow shovel to clear the driveway. The wind bit through my jacket, leaving my fingers stiff and numb. As I finished, I heard a click behind me, the inner garage door closing. My eyes darted back, expecting to see my dog or a gust of snow triggering the mechanism. But the garage was empty, save for the quiet hum of the overhead light. Unease settled like a stone in my chest, and I brushed it off with a nervous laugh. Returning inside, I locked every door and double-checked the windows. Alone, I attempted to focus on work, but the sense of being watched lingered. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep, every flicker of light a warning. The storm raged on, and I felt its weight not just on the world outside, but pressing into the walls around me. That night, as I sat staring at the glow of the screen, I realized that the house, the snow, the storm, they were no longer just a backdrop. They were actors in a play I hadn't auditioned for. The real intrusion came silently, almost politely in the dark hours. I had returned to my office after dinner, when I heard a whisper of movement near the coat closet in the garage. Heart hammering, I tiptoed toward it, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. "Hello?" I called, voice tight, brittle. The only response was a shuffle, low and quick. When I swung open the closet door, a young man tumbled out, shivering violently. He wore a heavy winter coat caked in snow, and his hair was plastered against his forehead. He muttered a quiet "Fyrir geftu" before bolting toward the front door. I froze, bewildered, my mind racing to process what had just happened. Snow still clung to his boots, leaving fresh prints that led into the blizzard. "Wait!" I shouted, but the storm swallowed my voice. He was gone. I scanned the garage, my rational mind insisting I was seeing a stranger in my home. How could this happen? The door had been locked. I had always trusted the garage as my buffer from the outside, a controlled threshold between the chaos of the storm and the safety of my life. Now that assumption lay in ruins. I called the police, but their response was slow. Roads blocked, phone signals weak, neighbors unreachable. I spent the night pacing, peering out windows, barricading entrances, counting every creak, every shadow. Footprints circled the driveway, stopping abruptly, as though the intruder had vanished mid-step. A cold draft snaked along my spine. I felt exposed in my own home. Hours stretched endlessly. Every gust of wind became a signal, every scrape against the siding a threat. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a growing sense of vulnerability I had never experienced. By morning, the police traced the footprints only to a nearby bus stop. No other evidence existed. The young man was gone, just gone. I installed security cameras the next day, checking every frame obsessively. Nothing appeared unusual, yet sometimes during storms, I swear I hear shuffling near the garage, faint and human though no one is there. The house, my sanctuary, had changed. The snowstorm had passed, but the intrusion lingered, invisible yet undeniable. I became hyper-aware. Every creak, every groan of the house seemed amplified. My coding work suffered, my concentration fractured by a creeping unease I could not shake. Even the mundane tasks, making coffee, clearing snow, checking mail, carried a whisper of danger. The storm had been a portal, a moment when the ordinary world peeled away to reveal a lurking vulnerability. One evening, weeks after the incident, I noticed the garage lights flicker again. My pulse spiked, fingers frozen over the keyboard. The pattern was the same as before, subtle, deliberate. I moved cautiously toward the garage, half expecting to confront the figure once more. Nothing, only the faint hum of the lights and the shadow of my own reflection in the glass panes. I spoke aloud, partly to reassure myself, partly to defy the unknown. "You're not here," I said, voice firm but trembling. Silence answered. I knew better. The house had learned to breathe with someone else's presence. The storm had left a mark, and the memory of intrusion had embedded itself into the walls, the floor, even the flickering lights. Neighbors, when I finally dared to speak of it, regarded me with polite concern, dismissing it as cabin fever or stress. But I knew the truth. The house had seen, had responded, and the storm had opened a door I couldn't close. My isolation was no longer voluntary, it was protective. The sensation of being watched, the rhythmic scraping, the sudden cold drafts, they became part of life. I adjusted, learned to live alongside the house's memory of the young man. It was not always fear. Sometimes it was a peculiar reassurance. I had survived. My vigilance had preserved me. The following winter, another storm arrived. Roads closed, snow piled high. I felt the familiar tension, a nervous anticipation. I cleared the driveway, paused, and listened. The garage door clicked. My hands clenched, yet no one appeared. The lights flickered, and I realized that my mind had become attuned to the subtle rhythms of my home. I installed extra cameras, motion sensors, even a smart lock system. Yet the sounds persisted during storms, the soft shuffling, almost like someone pacing while thinking, uncertain but deliberate. I would sometimes call out, half expecting the same quiet apology. "Fyrirgeftu," my mind whispered back in memory. In time, I began recording these moments, documenting every anomaly. Each storm became a study, a reminder of the fragility of safety and the thin barrier between solitude and intrusion. I spoke to no one about it, save for my closest friend over the phone. And even then, I skirted the edges of disbelief. It was in these hours of quiet and storm, listening to the house breathe, that I realized something profound. Vulnerability was not weakness. It was awareness. The storm, the intruder, the inexplicable sounds. They had taught me to respect the spaces I inhabit and the unpredictability of the world beyond my walls. Years later, the snowstorms continue. The house remains quiet by day, still and measured, but at night, when the wind rattles against the siding, I hear the subtle human rhythm near